First Strike, a novel by Byron Avant. Prologue. The Day the Sky Burned. October 16, 2025. 6:47 a.m. Eastern Time. Detective Sarah Martinez was drinking her third coffee of the morning at her desk in the NYPD's 15th precinct when every phone in the building started ringing at once. Not the usual scattered calls, every single line, simultaneously, like some coordinated prank. "Martinez, you seeing this?" Her partner, Mike Johnson, called from across the bullpen. He was staring at his computer screen, his face gone pale. Sarah walked over, coffee cup still in hand. The screen showed a news alert, red letters screaming across CNN's homepage, "Ballistic missile alert, this is not a drill." What the hell is? The windows exploded. Not from blast pressure, they were too far from the impact point for that. From the light. Pure white light, brighter than 1,000 suns, flooding through every window in Manhattan. Sarah's coffee cup hit the floor. She couldn't hear it shatter over the screams. The light faded after 3 seconds that felt like eternity. Sarah blinked away the afterimages, her retinas burning. Outside the window, she could see a column of fire rising into the sky from downtown. The mushroom cloud was already forming, boiling upward into the October sky like a malevolent god. "Oh God," someone whispered. That's where my sister works. That's the financial district. That's the blast wave hit. Windows that had survived the light didn't survive the pressure. Glass became shrapnel. Desks flew. Sarah found herself on the floor, bleeding from a dozen cuts, her ears ringing so loud she couldn't hear her own screams. When she could finally stand, she looked out through the shattered window. Manhattan was on fire. The entire southern tip of the island was just gone. Where the World Trade Center Memorial had stood, where Wall Street had pulsed with economic power, where millions of people had been going about their mourning, there was only fire and smoke and the terrible knowledge that they were all dead. Every single one of them. The death toll in New York alone would eventually reach 23 million. But Sarah didn't know that yet. She didn't know that Washington, D.C. had been hit at the same moment, or that Chicago was burning, or that Los Angeles was a crater, or that Houston had ceased to exist. All she knew was that the world had ended, and somehow, she was still alive. For now. October 16, 2025, 9:15 a.m. Central Time in Chicago, Dr. Rebecca Thompson was performing surgery when the EMP hit. The hospital's generators failed. The lights went out. And the patient on her table, a 6-year-old boy named Marcus, no relation to our hero, stopped breathing because the ventilator stopped working. She tried to save him. CPR in the dark, nurses running for manual equipment, everyone screaming because they could see the mushroom cloud through the operating room windows. But little Marcus died on the table while Chicago burned outside. He was the first of 30 million who would die in the immediate aftermath. Not from the bombs themselves, but from the infrastructure collapse. No power. No water. No medical care. Cities of millions reduced to pre-industrial survival in the span of minutes. Dr. Thompson survived the initial chaos. She lived for 6 more days, working around the clock to save whoever she could with whatever tools still worked. On the 7th day, she drank contaminated water, the purification systems were down, and died of radiation poisoning in the same hospital where she tried to save Marcus. Nobody was left to record her name. October 16, 2025, 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time. Los Angeles got the worst of it. The bomb that hit LA was a ground burst, designed to maximize casualties and fallout. 20 million people vaporized instantly. The blast crater was 3 miles wide. The firestorm spread for 50 miles in every direction. Maria Vasquez, mother of Elena, who we will meet later, was in Santa Monica when it happened. Far enough from the blast to survive, close enough to wish she hadn't. The thermal radiation burned her skin. The blast wave threw her through the window of the coffee shop where she'd been ordering a latte. She crawled out of the wreckage, her clothes on fire, her skin already blistering. Around her, thousands of people were doing the same, human torches screaming, running, dying. The sound of it would haunt her nightmares until the day she died, the collective scream of a city burning alive. Maria survived. She made it inland, away from the coast, away from the worst of the radiation. She was pregnant at the time, 3 months along. The baby survived too, against all odds. Elena would be born in a refugee camp in Nevada, delivered by candlelight by a veterinarian because all the real doctors were dead. But Maria's husband, Daniel, had been at work in downtown LA. She never found his body. There was nothing left to find. October 16, 2025, 11 a.m. Mountain Time. Captain Marcus West was in Cheyenne Mountain when the world ended. He was reviewing supply requisitions, boring, routine, the kind of work that made him question why he'd stayed in the Army, when the alarm started. He ran to the command center, his heart already knowing what his mind refused to accept. The screen showed it all: 5 launches, 5 impacts, 5 cities gone. The AI tracking systems had been blinded somehow. The Russians had done something to America's detection network, made their missiles invisible until it was too late. "Sir, we're receiving orders from..." The communications officer trailed off. "Sir, Washington is gone. Pentagon is gone. The entire chain of command is gone," Marcus finished. "It's all gone." For 72 hours, Cheyenne Mountain maintained operational status. They had power, they had supplies, they had communication with whatever military units had survived. Marcus found himself in command not because he was senior, most of the senior officers had been in Washington, but because he was alive and conscious and willing to make decisions. The decisions he made still haunted him 20 years later. On October 19, 2025, President Harris, the vice president, now president by virtue of being in Denver when D.C. was hit, surrendered. The United States of America, superpower, leader of the free world, ceased to exist as an independent nation. Marcus remembered watching the broadcast. President Harris, covered in ash, standing in front of a burned American flag, reading the terms of surrender. Russian occupation forces would arrive within the week. All U.S. military personnel were ordered to stand down. Resistance would be met with extreme measures. In the command center, hardened soldiers wept. Marcus didn't weep. He couldn't. Something inside him had broken when he watched those cities die, and whatever tears he might have had were locked away somewhere he couldn't reach. Instead, he started planning. Started thinking about bunkers and supplies and how long they could hold out underground. Started thinking about the future, because the present was unbearable. "Sir," Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez had said that day. She was the only other officer still functional, the only one who seemed to understand what needed to happen next. "What are your orders?" Marcus looked at the screen showing a dead nation. Looked at his soldiers, lost and broken and waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Looked at the American flag on the wall, already starting to feel like a memorial to something that used to exist. "We survive," he said. "We survive, and we remember. And someday, when we're strong enough, we take it all back." That was 20 years ago. The occupation years. The Russian occupation was surgical at first. They secured strategic locations, installed puppet governments, presented themselves as liberators rather than conquerors. The propaganda called it the American Reconstruction Initiative. But Reconstruction turned to exploitation. American resources flowed to Moscow. American workers labored under Russian overseers. American children learned Russian in school, were taught that the old America had been corrupt, that the nuclear strikes had been a necessary intervention. Some Americans collaborated. They had families to feed, mouths to keep quiet, and the Russians paid well for betrayal. Others resisted, small acts at first, graffiti and sabotage, nothing that could really hurt the occupation but enough to keep the spirit alive. And some Americans went underground. Literally. Into bunkers and caves and abandoned military installations. They became ghosts, rumors, the beginning of what would eventually become the resistance. The first year of occupation, 50,000 Americans died in pacification operations, the Russian term for mass executions. The second year, 100,000. By the 5th year, the Russians had killed more Americans than the bombs had. But they couldn't kill them all. And they couldn't kill the idea that America could be free again. In bunkers across the shattered nation, the survivors waited. They trained. They planned. They remembered. And they prepared for the day when America would rise again. Part 1, Resurrection Chapter 1. 20 years later, June 4, 2045, Denver Resistance Command. The morning sun rose over what used to be Denver, painting the radiation-scarred mountains in shades of gold and ash. Marcus West stood on the roof of the underground bunker complex, breathing air that still tasted like metal even after 2 decades. The Geiger counter at his belt clicked softly, background radiation, nothing deadly anymore, just a reminder of what they'd lost. At 52 years old, Marcus looked older. His dark hair had gone mostly gray, his face was mapped with lines that came from stress rather than laughter, and his eyes held the particular weariness of someone who'd seen civilization die and was trying to build it back with his bare hands. "You're up early, Commander." The voice belonged to Sarah Rodriguez, his second in command. She climbed through the reinforced hatch, carrying 2 cups of what passed for coffee these days, chicory root and synthetic caffeine, grown in the hydroponic farms 3 levels down. Sarah had aged better than Marcus, or maybe she just hit it better. At 45, she maintained the fitness of someone who'd spent 20 years preparing for war. Her black hair showed streaks of gray that she refused to dye, saying they'd earned their place. The scar across her left cheek, courtesy of a Russian patrol in '38, only made her more formidable. Couldn't sleep, Marcus took the cup, grateful for the warmth. Today's the day. You think they're ready? Marcus looked down at the training yard carved into the mountain. 200 soldiers, the best of the resistance, running drills under the watchful eye of Master Sergeant James Washington. Black, white, Latino, Asian, Americans all, forged in the fires of occupation into something harder than the enemy could imagine. The youngest was 16. The oldest was 63. Most fell somewhere in between, men and women who'd grown up in the occupation, who'd never known pre-war America but had been told enough stories to understand what they were fighting for. They'd better be, Marcus said. Because ready or not, we're taking back Colorado Springs. 20 years ago, Marcus had been a captain in what was left of the U.S. Army Strategic Command. He'd watched the missiles fall from a bunker in Cheyenne Mountain, had felt the earth shake as America's greatest cities turned to glass. He'd been 32 years old and certain the world had ended. But the world, stubborn thing that it was, had kept turning. The Russians had come with occupation forces, confident and victorious. They'd installed puppet governments, seized resources, turned America into a vassal state feeding Moscow's empire. They'd expected submission, acceptance, the slow death of the American spirit. They'd been wrong. Sir Lieutenant Tommy Nakamura appeared at the hatch, his Japanese-American features set in grim determination. At 35, Tommy had been 15 when the bombs fell, old enough to remember what America had been, young enough to adapt to what it had become. Scout teams report Russian patrol patterns haven't changed. They're still rotating every 6 hours, still using the same routes. They've gotten comfortable. Comfortable is careless, Sarah said. Careless gets you killed. Marcus nodded. Get everyone assembled. 0700 hours. I want to address the troops before we move out. The 2 officers disappeared back down the hatch, leaving Marcus alone with the sunrise and his thoughts. He allowed himself this moment, this single moment of doubt and fear, before he had to become the commander again. Had to become the symbol of American resistance, the man who never wavered, never doubted, never showed weakness. In private, he was terrified. 200 soldiers against a Russian garrison. If this went wrong, it wasn't just his people who'd die, it was the hope they represented. The resistance was fragile, scattered across a dozen states, barely coordinated. This operation had to succeed. Had to show other resistance cells that victory was possible. Failure meant 20 more years of occupation. Maybe forever. Marcus finished his coffee, or whatever it was, and headed back inside. He had a speech to give. 0700 hours. The assembly chamber had been an emergency bunker during the Cold War, designed to house government officials in case of nuclear attack. Now it housed the remnants of American military power, 200 soldiers in mismatched uniforms, carrying weapons cobbled together from salvage and black market trades, but standing at attention with parade ground precision. Marcus stood on the raised platform, looking out at faces young and old. He recognized most of them. Had trained with them, fought beside them, buried too many of them over the years. 20 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying across the underground chamber, Russia thought they'd beaten us. 5 missiles. 5 cities. 60 million dead. They thought that would break America, that we'd surrender our values along with our territory. He paused, letting the words sink in. Every person in this room had lost someone in the strikes. Parents. Children. Friends. Entire families erased in nuclear fire. The grief was a shared thing, a collective wound that had never healed. They were half right, Marcus continued. We surrendered. We had to, we had no choice. Our cities were gone. Our military was shattered. Our government was decapitated. What were we supposed to do? Keep fighting and watch them destroy what was left? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. They'd all had this argument before, with themselves and each other. Had wondered if surrender had been cowardice or wisdom, betrayal or survival. But they forgot something important about Americans. Marcus's voice hardened. We don't stay down. We don't stay beaten. And we sure as hell don't forget. The murmurs grew louder, angrier. For 20 years, we've lived like rats in holes. We've watched Russians patrol our streets, teach our children their lies, loot our country, and ship the wealth back to Moscow. We've watched collaborators, our own people, sell out America for a little comfort, a little safety. He could see anger building in the crowd now. Good. Anger was fuel. And for 20 years, we've been preparing. Training. Gathering supplies. Building networks. Waiting for the moment when we were strong enough to hit back. That moment is now. Marcus gestured to the tactical display behind him, showing a map of Colorado Springs. Today, we take the first step in reminding them of their mistake. Today, we take Colorado Springs. Not because it's strategic, though it is. Not because it sends a message, though it will. We take it because it's ours, and we're taking back what belongs to us. The chamber erupted in cheers. Not the wild enthusiasm of civilians playing soldier, but the controlled aggression of professionals ready to work. Master Sergeant James Washington stepped forward. At 55, he was one of the oldest fighters they had, a former Marine who'd survived the nuclear strike on Camp Pendleton through sheer luck and a training exercise that had him in the mountains when the bombs fell. His dark skin bore the scars of 20 years of resistance fighting, bullet wounds, shrapnel scars, and the mottled patterns of radiation burns that never quite healed. Listen up. Washington's voice could have stripped paint. This ain't a suicide mission, but it ain't a cakewalk either. Russians have fortified Colorado Springs, automated defenses, drone patrols, a garrison of 200 regulars. We're going in fast, hitting hard, and getting out before they can call reinforcements from Denver. He gestured to the tactical display, which shifted to show detailed satellite imagery, captured from Russian systems through means Marcus preferred not to think about too carefully. 3 teams, Washington continued. Alpha Team, led by Commander West, takes the communications hub. That's priority 1, shut down their ability to call for help. Bravo Team, Lieutenant Rodriguez commands, hits the drone control center. No eyes in the sky means we own the ground. Charlie Team, under Lieutenant Nakamura, secures the armory and supply depot. Questions? A hand went up. Private Elena Vasquez, 19 years old, born 3 months before the missiles fell. She'd grown up in refugee camps and resistance bunkers, had never known pre-war America but had been told enough stories to understand what they were fighting for. Her mother, Maria, had died 5 years ago from radiation-induced cancer. Her father had never been found in the ruins of Los Angeles. Elena wore the flag patch on her shoulder like a sacred trust. Sir, Elena's voice was steady despite her youth, what about civilians? Russian civilians. They've been settling in Colorado Springs for 15 years. Some of them are families, not soldiers. It was a good question. The kind of question that separated soldiers from murderers. Marcus met her eyes. Good question, Private. Here's the answer, we're not them. We don't target civilians. We don't punish people for their government's choices. We're here to liberate American territory, not commit atrocities. Anyone who surrenders gets treated according to the laws of war, the real laws, not the Russian version. He looked around the room, making sure everyone heard this. That goes for everyone. I hear about war crimes, about revenge killings, about anything that makes us look like the bad guys. I'll shoot you myself. We're Americans. We fight clean, or we don't fight at all. Clear? Sir, yes sir. The response was thunderous. Marcus felt a surge of pride. These weren't just soldiers. They were better than that. They were the conscience of a nation, the keepers of values that had survived nuclear fire. Equipment check at 0800, Marcus ordered. We roll out at 0900. Make your peace, check your gear, and get ready. Today we remind the world that America isn't dead. It was just sleeping. As the crowd dispersed to their preparations, Sarah approached Marcus. That was a good speech. It was a necessary speech, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. You really think we can win this? Marcus looked at her. Sarah had been with him from the beginning, had been one of the first to join him in the underground. She'd earned the right to honesty. I think if we don't try, we've already lost. Better to die fighting than live as slaves. That's not an answer. No, Marcus agreed. It's not. But it's the only one I've got. 0900 hours, they advanced the operation launched exactly on time. 3 teams, 67 soldiers each, moving through the irradiated wilderness on routes they'd scouted for months. The land around Denver was still hot, not immediately lethal, but dangerous for long-term exposure. They'd be in and out before the rads accumulated to dangerous levels. At least, that was the plan. Marcus led Alpha Team through the ruins of the southern suburbs. 20 years had turned the area into an urban jungle, buildings collapsed by blast waves and neglect, vegetation reclaiming the streets, nature and destruction competing for dominance. His team moved and practiced silence, weapons ready, every sense alert. The weapons were a mix of American and Russian, M4 carbines salvaged from military bases, AK-400s taken from Russian patrols, even a few pre-war hunting rifles that had been hidden away during the occupation. Not uniform, not pretty, but functional. "Contact," whispered Corporal David Miller, their point man. At 28, Miller had been 8 years old when the bombs fell. He'd grown up in the occupation, learned to hate Russians before he learned algebra. 200 meters Russian foot patrol, 4 soldiers. Marcus raised his fist. The team froze, melting into cover with practiced ease. "Avoid or engage?" Sarah asked over the tactical radio, her voice a whisper in his earpiece. Marcus studied the patrol through his binoculars. Young men, barely in their 20s, carrying AK-400s, the latest Russian rifle, all composite materials and computerized fire control. They walked with the lazy confidence of occupiers who'd never faced real resistance, laughing about something, probably joking about American women or American whiskey or how easy this assignment was. A year ago, Marcus would have let them pass. The resistance had been too weak for direct confrontation, had relied on hit-and-run raids and sabotage. But a year ago, they hadn't been ready to announce their presence. Today was different. Today was about sending a message. "Engage," Marcus ordered quietly. Silent. No survivors to report back. His team moved like ghosts. 20 years of training, 20 years of learning to kill quietly and efficiently. The Russian patrol never knew what hit them. For shots, suppressed rifles making no more sound than coughs, for bodies crumpling to the ground, for fewer soldiers for Russia's empire. Marcus approached the bodies, weapon ready, but the shots had been perfect. Headshots, all of them. His soldiers knew their business. He knelt beside one of the bodies. The soldier couldn't have been more than 22, with a wedding ring on his finger and a photo in his pocket, a pretty blonde woman holding a baby. This kid had probably been drafted, had probably never wanted to be in America, would probably rather have been home with his wife and child. Marcus felt nothing. Not pride, not shame, not even satisfaction. Just the cold calculation of war. This soldier had chosen, or been forced, to serve the country that destroyed America. That made him an enemy combatant, a legitimate target, an acceptable casualty. He'd save his sympathy for people who deserved it. "Strip them," Marcus ordered. "Take weapons, ammo, anything useful. Leave the bodies where they'll be found." "Sir?" Miller looked confused. "We don't want to alert them to, we want exactly that," Marcus interrupted. "We want them scared. Want them wondering who's out here, how many of us there are, where we'll hit next. Fear is a weapon, Corporal. Learn to use it." They left the bodies in the street, positioned so they'd be visible from the main road. Within an hour, a Russian patrol would find them. The garrison would go on alert. Comfort would be replaced by paranoia. Good. Alpha Team moved on, deeper into the ruins, closer to their target. The communications hub was 5 clicks away, 5 kilometers of devastated urban landscape, every meter potentially hiding Russian patrols or automated defenses or refugees who might report their presence. They covered the distance in 90 minutes, moving fast but careful, avoiding main roads and known surveillance points. By the time they reached the staging point, an abandoned grocery store with sight lines to the communications hub, it was 10:30 a.m., and the operation was running on schedule. "Bravo team in position," Sarah reported over the radio. "We have eyes on the drone center. Defenses are as expected, 2 guard posts, automated turrets, and what looks like a full squad inside." "Charlie team ready," Nakamura added. "Armory is lightly defended. Looks like they're confident nobody would dare attack it." "Their mistake," Marcus said. "Stand by for signal." "We hit all 3 simultaneously on my mark." He steadied the communications hub through his scope. It had been a National Guard armory before the war, a solid concrete building designed to withstand attacks. Now it bristled with Russian technology, satellite uplinks, encrypted radio arrays, the digital backbone of their occupation. 6 guards protected it, along with automated turrets powered by Moscow's military AI systems. The AI was the problem. Human guards could be killed, human vigilance could waver. But AI never slept, never got bored, never made mistakes. The turrets would track and eliminate any threat with machine precision. Unless you shut them down first. Private Martinez, Marcus called to their electronics warfare specialist. Status on the jammer? Ready, sir. Martinez was a kid, 23 years old, but he understood Russian military systems better than anyone else in the resistance. He'd learned by taking them apart, piece by piece, every time they salvaged Russian equipment. I can blind their automated defenses for 90 seconds. Maybe 2 minutes if we're lucky. After that, they'll adapt, and we'll be facing active defenses. 90 seconds to breach and clear a fortified position, Marcus mused. That's tight. It's what we trained for, Sarah reminded him over the radio. Marcus checked his watch. 10:45 a.m. The sun was climbing higher, the day growing warmer. In pre-war times, this would have been a beautiful June morning in Colorado. Now it was just another day of war. All teams, stand by, Marcus ordered. Martinez, activate jamming on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Martinez triggered the jammer. Invisible electromagnetic waves flooded the area, scrambling the AI systems that controlled the automated defenses. The turrets, which had been tracking random movement patterns, suddenly went still, blind and deaf and helpless. Jamming active, Martinez reported. Clock is running. Alpha Team, breach. Marcus ordered. They moved fast, covering the 100 meters to the communications hub in less than 10 seconds. The guards, alerted by the sudden failure of their automated defenses, were just beginning to respond when Alpha Team hit them. Flashbangs first, 2 grenades through the windows, the world exploding in light and sound. Then the breach team, for soldiers moving through the door with practiced violence. Gunfire. Shouting. The controlled chaos of close-quarters combat. Marcus came through the door third, his rifle up and ready. The main room was a disaster, overturned furniture, sparking electronics, 4 Russian soldiers down and 2 more trying to fight back from behind an overturned desk. Surrender. Marcus shouted in Russian. He'd learned the language over 20 years of fighting. Surrender or die. One of the soldiers, young and terrified, dropped his weapon. The other, older and harder, raised his rifle. Marcus shot him twice in the chest before he could fire. The young soldier who'd surrendered was crying, hands raised, babbling in Russian about having a family, about not wanting to fight, about just wanting to go home. Secure him, Marcus ordered. Keep him alive. We might need intelligence. His team swept the rest of the building, 3 rooms, 2 hallways, 1 basement. They found 3 more soldiers hiding in the basement, all of whom surrendered immediately. No casualties on Alpha Team. 8 Russians dead, 4 captured. Charges set, reported Sergeant Williams, Alpha Team's demolitions expert. We can blow the communications hub or take it intact, your choice. Marcus thought about it. Blowing it would deny the Russians its use. But taking it intact would give the resistance access to Russian encrypted communications, might let them monitor Russian movements, might give them an intelligence advantage. Take it intact, he decided. Can you lock it down? Keep them from accessing it remotely? Already working on it, sir. 30 seconds left on the jammer. All teams, status, Marcus ordered. Bravo team successful, Sarah reported. Drone center is ours. We have casualties, 2 wounded, neither critical. Russian casualties. Significant. Charlie team successful, Nakamura added. Armory secured. You need to see what we found here, sir. On my way, Marcus said. Alpha team, fortify position. Williams, get that communications hub locked down. Martinez, shut down the jammer and see if you can tap into their systems. The jammer cut off. The automated turret should have come back online, should have started tracking and firing. But Williams had already cut their power feeds, left them as useless decoration on the building's walls. Marcus moved through Colorado Springs streets with a security detachment, weapons ready, expecting Russian reinforcements at any moment. But the streets were quiet, eerily so. The garrison should have been responding by now, should have been sending units to investigate the communications failure. Either they were slower than expected, or they were preparing something nasty. The armory was on the eastern edge of the city, a low concrete building that had been a warehouse before the war. Charlie team had secured the perimeter, posting guards and setting up defensive positions. They'd clearly been busy. Russian weapons were stacked neatly in the yard, everything from rifles to rocket launchers. "Sir," Nakamura met Marcus at the entrance. "We got more than we expected. A lot more." Inside the armory, Marcus understood what Nakamura meant. This wasn't just an armory, it was a major supply depot. Weapons, ammunition, body armor, communications equipment, medical supplies, food, water. Everything an army needed to operate. And in the back, in a secured room that Charlie team had broken into, were computers. Russian military computers, still running, still connected to their networks. "We found evidence," Nakamura said quietly. "Documented proof of everything we suspected. War crimes. Mass executions. Plans for," he stopped, his face going pale. "Sir, they're planning another attack. Not on America. On Europe. They want to finish what they started." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. "Show me." The documents were damning. Plans for nuclear strikes on London, Paris, Berlin. Not total destruction, Russia had learned that lesson, but targeted hits to decapitate European governments and force surrender. With America already conquered, Europe would have no choice but to submit. "Copy everything," Marcus ordered. "Every file, every document, every email. We need proof. We need the world to see this." An explosion shook the building. Then another. And another. "Contact," someone shouted. "Russians are counterattacking." Marcus ran to the windows. Russian forces were advancing down the main street, power armor troops, heavy weapons, drone support that shouldn't have been possible with the drone center destroyed. They'd brought in backup systems, had been better prepared than intelligence suggested. "All teams, fall back to Rally Point Delta," Marcus ordered. "We're taking what we can carry and getting out. Move." The next 20 minutes were chaos. Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie teams fought a running retreat through Colorado Springs, carrying what supplies they could, destroying what they couldn't. Russian forces pressed them hard, but the resistance had planned for this, had scouted multiple escape routes. By 1400 hours, they were clear of the city, moving through the mountains toward the bunker complex. Behind them, Colorado Springs was in turmoil, Russian forces securing their positions, hunting for the attackers who'd hit them and vanished. "Status," Marcus demanded once they'd reached a safe distance. "Alpha team, no casualties," someone reported. "Bravo team, 2 wounded, both stable," Sarah added. "Charlie team, 1 dead, 3 wounded," Nakamura's voice was tight. "Private Jackson took shrapnel when their reinforcements arrived. He didn't make it." Marcus closed his eyes. Private David Jackson, 24 years old, from Atlanta. His parents had died in the occupation. He joined the resistance at 16, had spent 8 years fighting for a country he'd barely known. And now he was dead, left behind in Colorado Springs because they couldn't risk taking the body. "Mark his sacrifice," Marcus said quietly. "We'll honor him properly when we get back." They reached the bunker complex at 1600 hours. The guards had been watching for them, opened the blast doors immediately. As the teams filed inside, exhausted and bloody but victorious, Marcus saw something he hadn't expected. People were cheering. Civilians who lived in the bunker complex, refugees, families, children, were lining the corridors, applauding, crying, celebrating. "They did it," someone was saying. "They actually did it. They hit the Russians and got away with it." Marcus made his way to the command center, where General Patricia Hayes was waiting. Hayes had been a colonel before the war, had become a general through the simple expedient of being the highest-ranking officer who survived. She was 65 now, her hair pure white, her face lined with the weight of command. "Report," Hayes ordered. "Mission successful," Marcus said. "We took the communications hub intact, destroyed the drone center, and captured significant supplies from the armory. We also recovered intelligence files that show Russian plans for strikes on Europe." Hayes' eyes widened. "They're planning more attacks? Within the next 6 months, if the documents are accurate. They want to finish conquering the West while they still have momentum. Then we need to warn Europe. They need to prepare." "We will," Marcus agreed. "But first, we need to hold what we've taken. Colorado Springs is going to be a symbol, General. It's the first time in 20 years that Americans have openly taken territory from the Russians. Every resistance cell in the country is going to be watching what happens next." Hayes nodded slowly. "Then we'd better not disappoint them. Get cleaned up, Commander." Tonight, we're going to raise the flag over Colorado Springs, and I want you there when we do it. 1900 hours, the raising. By the time the sun was setting, resistance forces had moved back into Colorado Springs. Not to occupy it, they didn't have the numbers for that, but to make a statement. They chose the town square, where a Russian flag had flown for 20 years. A crowd gathered, resistance fighters, civilians who'd been hiding in the city, even a few Russian prisoners who'd been allowed to watch under guard. Marcus stood at the base of the flagpole, holding a folded American flag. It was one of the old ones, a 48-star flag from before Alaska and Hawaii, salvaged from a museum and preserved through 20 years of occupation. The fabric was faded, the edges worn, but it was real. Master Sergeant Washington performed the honor of raising it. His dark hands, scarred and weathered, moved with ceremony as he attached the flag to the ropes and began to pull. Slowly, deliberately, the American flag rose into the Colorado evening. When it reached the top, unfurling in the wind, catching the last rays of sunlight, 200 resistance fighters came to attention and saluted. Marcus saw Elena Vasquez standing at attention, tears streaming down her face as she saluted the flag. She'd never seen it fly before except in photos and videos, had only known it from stories told by her dying mother. Now here it was, real and tangible, proof that some things couldn't be destroyed by fire or time. "What now, Commander?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus looked at the flag, at his soldiers, at the city they'd liberated for however briefly. "Now?" He smiled, and it wasn't a gentle smile. "Now we show them why you don't mess with America. Now we take it all back." The war for America's soul had just begun. And this time, America was going to win. Chapter 2. The Phoenix Protocol. 3 months later, September 2045. 3 months after Colorado Springs, the resistance controlled a quarter of Colorado and was bleeding into Wyoming and New Mexico. The Russians had responded with brutal efficiency, orbital strikes on suspected resistance bases, chemical weapons in the mountain passes, scorched earth tactics that would have made Sherman blanch. But for every base they destroyed, 2 more appeared. For every resistance fighter they killed, 5 more joined up. America was remembering how to fight, and the lesson was a harsh one for Moscow. Marcus stood in what they'd started calling the War Room, a converted NORAD bunker deep under Cheyenne Mountain, somehow still operational after 20 years. The mountain had protected it from the initial strikes, and Russian forces had never found the entrance. Now it served as the nerve center of the American resistance. The room was a study in contrasts, walls of ancient technology from the Cold War era next to jury-rigged modern systems cobbled together from salvage and innovation. Holographic displays showed troop movements and supply lines, overlaid on maps that still showed a unified United States even though that nation hadn't existed for 20 years. "We've got a problem," General Patricia Hayes announced, her voice cutting through the low buzz of activity. She'd been working 18-hour days since Colorado Springs, coordinating resistance cells across 6 states, and it showed in the dark circles under her eyes. "Just one?" Marcus asked dryly, looking up from the supply reports he'd been reviewing. The numbers weren't good, they never were. "That's an improvement." Hayes didn't smile. She was past smiling these days. Chinese intelligence reached out through the underground network. They have information about the Russian attack plans, the ones we found in Colorado Springs. They're willing to share everything they know about Russian military capabilities, troop dispositions, weakness in their supply chain. Marcus felt his spine stiffen. In exchange for what? Nothing. Hayes pulled up a holographic display showing Chinese military installations along their border with Russia. "They're giving it to us for free." Apparently, Beijing isn't happy about Moscow's imperial ambitions. Russia's getting too powerful, too aggressive, threatening Chinese interests in Asia. They want them knocked down a peg, and they're willing to help us do it. Sarah, who'd been listening from her station across the room, whistled low. "Enemy of my enemy?" "More like the enemy of my enemy is a useful tool," Marcus corrected, standing up and walking to the display. "China doesn't care about American democracy or freedom or any of the things we're fighting for. They care about the balance of power. Right now, a resurgent America helps them by creating problems for Russia. Can we trust them?" Lieutenant Nakamura asked, joining the conversation. He'd been promoted after Colorado Springs, was now coordinating intelligence operations across the resistance network. "Of course not," Marcus said flatly. "But we can use them. Intelligence is intelligence, regardless of the source. We verify everything, trust nothing, and extract maximum advantage while giving minimum commitment." Washington nodded his approval from where he sat, in a wheelchair now, after taking a bullet defending an evacuation route 2 months ago. The bullet had shattered his left femur, and without proper medical facilities, it had healed poorly. But Washington refused to retire, insisted on continuing his work as training coordinator even from a chair. Smart, Washington said. Take what they offer, verify everything, trust nothing. Classic intelligence work. Sun Tzu would approve. The Chinese data arrived 3 days later, delivered through encrypted channels by intermediaries who probably didn't know who they were working for. It was comprehensive, detailed breakdowns of Russian military capabilities, supply routes from Alaska to California, communication protocols, troop rotation schedules, even psychological profiles of key Russian commanders. This is extensive, Nakamura said, scrolling through the files. They've been collecting this for years. The level of detail suggests they have assets inside Russian command structures. Or they want us to think they do, Sarah cautioned. Could be disinformation, meant to lead us into a trap. Then we verify it, Marcus said. We have our own intelligence on Russian operations. Cross-reference everything. If the Chinese data matches what we know independently, we can have some confidence in the rest. They spent a week verifying the intelligence. Resistance scouts confirmed troop dispositions. Intercepted communications matched reported protocols. Supply convoy schedules aligned with observed movements. By the end of the week, they had to admit that the Chinese intelligence appeared genuine. And it revealed something crucial: Russia's grip on America wasn't as strong as it appeared. Look at this. Marcus highlighted a section of the western United States on the holographic display. The West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington, they're barely holding it. According to Chinese intel, the Russians are stretched thin, using automated systems and local collaborators to maintain control. Actual military presence is minimal. If we could cut off their supply lines from Alaska, we could isolate the entire Pacific coast, Sarah finished, her eyes lighting up with the possibility. Turn their garrison into a prison. Starve them out or force them to evaluate. Big if, Washington cautioned from his wheelchair. Alaska's a fortress. Russians have been fortifying it for 20 years, using it as their main supply hub for the entire Western occupation. Taking it would require naval power, air support, capabilities we don't have. Don't we? General Hayes pulled up another display, this one showing the Oregon coast. A submarine icon blinked red in the offshore waters. USS Texas. Virginia-class submarine. One of 3 that were at sea when the missiles fell. She's been playing hide-and-seek with Russian patrols for 20 years, living off captured supplies, salvaged parts, and sheer stubbornness. Captain's willing to work with us if we can guarantee support and supply. Marcus stared at the display, his mind already racing through the possibilities. One submarine. A single boat. Against the Russian Pacific Fleet, against the fortified positions in Alaska, against the supply convoys that kept the Western occupation running. It was insane. It was impossible. It was the most American thing he'd ever heard. Give me that, Captain, he said. I want to talk about submarines, logistics, and how one boat can win a war. The Texas Gambit Captain Rachel Morrison commanded the USS Texas like she was conducting a symphony, quiet, precise, and absolutely deadly. The video conference from somewhere in the Pacific was grainy, the signal bouncing through multiple relays to avoid Russian detection, but her voice came through clear and determined. At 62, Morrison was a ghost from the old Navy, one of the few submarine commanders who'd been at sea when the world ended. Her face showed 2 decades of underwater warfare, pale skin from lack of sunlight, lines around her eyes from peering through periscopes, a certain hardness that came from 20 years of living in a steel tube while hunting and being hunted. Commander West, she said, and her voice had the peculiar flatness of someone who'd spent too long speaking in whispers. I've been waiting 2 decades for this call. Captain Morrison, Marcus replied. I understand you're interested in causing problems for the Russian Pacific Fleet. Interested is putting it mildly, Commander. I've been harassing their supply lines for years, sinking merchant ships, mining harbors, generally making myself a pain in Moscow's ass. But there's only so much one submarine can do when you're operating without support, without resupply, without even confirmation that you're still fighting for a country that exists. You're talking about a coordinated offensive? I'm talking about cutting Alaska off from the mainland, Marcus said, leaning forward intently. Sinking every supply ship, disrupting every convoy, mining every approach, making it impossible for Russia to support their West Coast occupation. Can you do it? Morrison's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. With support? With actual targeting data, with resupply, with confirmation that I'm part of a larger operation and not just a crazy old woman playing pirate. Commander, I can make the Pacific Ocean into Russia's graveyard. Over the next 3 hours, they hammered out the details. The USS Texas would be joined by 2 other submarines that had been recently brought back online, USS Montana and USS Virginia. The Montana had been in dry dock in San Diego when the bombs fell, had been damaged but reparable. A resistance cell had spent 5 years secretly fixing her, launching her at night, getting her to sea before Russians noticed she was gone. The Virginia had an even stranger story. She'd been mothballed in a naval facility in Washington state, scheduled for decommissioning. When the occupation began, her crew had refused to surrender her, had taken her to sea and simply disappeared. For 18 years, nobody had heard from her. Then, 6 months ago, she'd made contact with resistance networks, reporting that she'd been operating independently in the Arctic Ocean, surviving off captured Russian supplies and determination. 3 submarines. 3 boats against the Russian Pacific Fleet. Against fortified bases in Alaska. Against supply convoys protected by destroyers and aircraft. The odds weren't good. They weren't even fair. But fair fights were for people who could afford to lose. We'll need to coordinate with ground operations, Morrison said. No point in strangling their supply lines if you can't exploit the weakness it creates. While we're making Russia's naval operations hellish, you need to be liberating territory, taking cities, giving them too many problems to handle at once. Already planned, Marcus assured her. We're launching a diversified offensive across the Midwest. Hit Russian positions in Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Nebraska, force them to commit reserves, pull troops from the coasts, stretch their logistics to the breaking point. When? 3 weeks. We need time to position units, gather supplies, coordinate with resistance cells across the target regions. Can Texas and her sister boats be ready? Commander, Morrison said, and her smile widened, we've been ready for 20 years. Just give us the targets and watch us work. The call ended. Marcus sat back in his chair, suddenly feeling the weight of what they were planning. This wasn't Colorado Springs, a single raid, a tactical victory, mostly symbolic. This was a full-scale offensive, a strategic campaign designed to break Russian control of the American West. If it worked, it would be the first major liberation since the surrender. If it failed, it would destroy the resistance's credibility, waste resources they couldn't replace, and probably get everyone involved killed. You're having second thoughts, Sarah observed. She'd stayed in the room after the others left, knew Marcus well enough to read his silences. I'm having third, fourth, and fifth thoughts, Marcus admitted. This is a massive risk, Sarah. We're betting everything on a plan that has maybe a 30% chance of success. Better than 0%, which is what we had last year. Is it? Marcus stood, pacing the room. Every soldier who dies in this offensive, that's on me. Every civilian who gets caught in the crossfire, every city that gets destroyed in the fighting, I'm responsible for that. No, Sarah said firmly. The Russians are responsible for that. They started this war. They killed 60 million Americans. They occupied our country. We're just finishing what they started. That's not how it feels. It never does. Command is a burden, Marcus. You know that. But somebody has to carry it, and I'd rather it be you than anyone else I can think of. Marcus looked at her, his second-in-command, his friend, the person who'd stood by him through 20 years of hell. Why? Because you still care about the cost. Because you'll do everything possible to minimize casualties, protect civilians, fight clean. Because you remember we're supposed to be the good guys. She stood, walked over to stand beside him. The day you stop having doubts is the day you need to step down. Doubt means you still have a conscience. Conscience doesn't win wars. No. But it helps us remember what we're winning them for. Operation Liberty, the offensive launched on September 27, 2045, exactly 20 years and 276 days after the missiles fell. The resistance hit Russian positions across 6 states simultaneously, turning the American heartland into a war zone. Marcus led the assault on Kansas City personally. 2,000 fighters against a Russian garrison of 3,000, with automated defense systems and air support from drone bases in St. Louis. On paper, they should have lost. On paper, the Russians had every advantage: better weapons, better armor, air superiority, defensive positions. But paper didn't account for rage. Paper didn't account for 20 years of occupation breeding a fury that transcended tactical considerations. Paper didn't account for Americans fighting for their homes against invaders who thought they'd won. The battle for Kansas City lasted 72 hours. 72 hours of house-to-house fighting, of ambushes and counter-ambushes, of positions taken and lost and retaken. Marcus's command post was a burned-out apartment building on the city's eastern edge, where he coordinated attacks through a haze of smoke and exhaustion. Alpha Company is pinned down near the river, reported Lieutenant Williams over the radio, his voice tight with stress. Russians brought up heavy armor, 3 tanks, maybe 4. We can't advance without anti-tank support. Charlie Company, can you flank? Marcus asked. Negative, sir, we're engaged with a mechanized infantry platoon. Can't break contact without taking heavy casualties. Marcus studied the tactical display, looking for options. The tanks were the problem, Russian T-14s, modern main battle tanks with reactive armor and active defense systems. The resistance had anti-tank weapons, but not many, and getting close enough to use them meant exposing soldiers to tank fire. Bravo Company, Marcus ordered. I need you to draw the tank's attention. Make noise, look dangerous, get them focused on you. Sir, that's going to get us killed, the Bravo Company commander protested. Not if you move after you fire. Hit and run, don't stay in one place. Keep them focused on you while Alpha flanks and takes them from the side. Can you do it? A pause. Then, yes sir, Bravo Company moving into position. What followed was a textbook example of combined arms warfare, Bravo making diversionary attacks, drawing the tanks forward, while Alpha moved through side streets and ruined buildings to hit them from the flank. Anti-tank missiles struck from unexpected angles. Tanks exploded, brewed up, filled the Kansas City afternoon with pillars of black smoke. 3 tanks destroyed. 4 Russian armored vehicles disabled. A platoon of Russian infantry surrendered after their support was eliminated. Cost, 17 resistance fighters dead, 34 wounded. Marcus added the numbers to his mental tally. Since the offensive began, they'd lost over 200 soldiers. 200 Americans who'd believed in liberation enough to die for it. But they were winning. Block by block, building by building, Kansas City was falling. Russian forces were pulling back toward fortified positions in the city center, consolidating, preparing for a last stand or evacuation. Sir, Sarah approached, her uniform covered in dust and blood, not hers, she assured him when he looked concerned. Intelligence reports. The Russians are calling for reinforcements from St. Louis. ETA 4 hours. Then we finish this in 3, Marcus decided. All companies, final push. I want Kansas City secured before nightfall. The final assault was chaos. Resistance forces advanced on a broad front, hitting Russian positions from multiple directions, overwhelming them through sheer aggression. Marcus was in the thick of it, leading from the front because that's what his soldiers needed to see, their commanders sharing their risk, fighting beside them. He killed 4 Russian soldiers that day. Shot them at close range, watched them die, felt nothing but grim satisfaction that it wasn't his people dying instead. War had a way of simplifying morality, reducing it to us versus them, alive versus dead. By 1800 hours, the last Russian forces in Kansas City were surrendering or fleeing. The resistance controlled the city. The American flag flew over City Hall for the first time in 20 years. Marcus stood on the steps of City Hall, watching the flag rise, and felt empty. They'd won. They'd actually won. But the cost kept echoing in his head, 200 dead in 3 days. How many more would it take to win the war? How many more cities would have to become battlegrounds? Commander. It was Washington, wheeling himself up the ramp that had been installed for disabled access, ironically, installed by Russians during the occupation. You did good. Kansas City is liberated. At what cost? The cost of freedom, Washington said simply. There's no discount. Never has been. Every generation has to pay the price, or freedom dies. We're just paying what our parents and grandparents paid, what our children will have to pay. It's the price of living in a world where tyrants exist. Did they teach you that in the Marines? Hell no. Learned it in the streets, growing up in Detroit. World ain't fair, never will be. But at least we can make it better for the next generation. Washington gestured to the flag. That's what that means. Not that we're perfect. Not that we always win. Just that we keep trying, keep fighting, keep refusing to accept tyranny as normal. Marcus looked at his old friend, 55 years old, confined to a wheelchair, still fighting because the alternative was surrender. I'm glad you're here, Sergeant. Where else would I be? This is history, Commander. This is the day America started coming back. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Reports came in throughout the night. Des Moines had fallen. Omaha was under siege but would fall by morning. Oklahoma City was in resistance hands. Wichita, Topeka, Tulsa. Like dominoes, Russian-held cities were toppling, not because the resistance was stronger, but because they were angrier, more determined, fighting for something worth dying for. And in the Pacific, Captain Morrison was keeping her promise. Russian supply ships exploded in the night. Convoys disappeared without a trace. The Bering Strait was becoming a graveyard of steel and ice. Alaska was being slowly strangled, cut off from resupply, forced to survive on whatever stockpiles they had accumulated. Their withdrawing from Seattle, intelligence reported a week into the offensive. Nakamura delivered the news personally, his face showing the exhaustion of a week with minimal sleep. Russians are pulling back to fortified positions in Alaska, abandoning the West Coast garrisons. They can't hold territory when they can't supply it. Then we follow them, Marcus ordered. Liberate every city, secure every port, every airport, every strategic position. I want the American flag flying from San Diego to Seattle by the end of the month. It took 6 weeks instead of 4. 6 weeks of continuous combat, of victories and setbacks, of casualties that mounted with each passing day. But when the last Russian forces evacuated Portland under covering fire from their remaining air support, the West Coast was American again. Marcus stood on the beach in Los Angeles, or what used to be Los Angeles, now a radiation-scarred wasteland where the city had once stood, looking out at the Pacific Ocean. 20 years ago, this city had been vaporized, 20 million people reduced to shadows and ash. The crater was still visible, a massive depression in the earth filled with contaminated water, a monument to the price of nuclear war. Around the crater, survivors had built a new city, smaller, humbler, but alive. New Los Angeles, they called it, rising from the ashes of the old. Russians had controlled it for 20 years, but now it was American again. Sir Elena Vasquez approached, now a corporal and decorated veteran of a dozen battles. She'd been at Kansas City, had fought in the street-to-street combat, had killed Russian soldiers and watched her friends die. At 19, she'd seen more war than most soldiers saw in a lifetime. General Hayes wants you back at Cheyenne. Says we've got a situation. What kind of situation? The Chinese kind. They're calling in their favor. The price of alliance back at Cheyenne Mountain. General Hayes looked grim. The war room was crowded. All the senior resistance leaders had been called in for this meeting. Marcus recognized most of them, commanders from California, Oregon, Washington, Montana, Wyoming. The faces of American resistance, gathered to discuss a threat they hadn't expected. Beijing wants payment for their intelligence support, Hayes said without preamble. They're calling it a strategic alignment opportunity. I call it blackmail. What do they want? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't be good. They want us to open a second front against Russia. Hayes pulled up a display showing the Aleutian Islands and the Siberian coast. Not just defensive liberation of American territory. They want us to attack Russian positions in the Aleutians, disrupt their Asian operations, essentially start a proxy war in the Pacific theater. Using American soldiers as Chinese pawns. The room erupted in angry voices. Commanders protesting, arguing, some advocating for acceptance because they needed Chinese support, others demanding they tell Beijing to go to hell because America didn't fight other nations' wars. Marcus waited for the noise to die down, then spoke quietly. What happens if we refuse? Threats, Hayes said. Economic sanctions against territories we control, which matters because we need trade. Withdrawal of intelligence support, which matters because their intel has been accurate and useful. And implied threats of military intervention, which matters because China has the capability to make our liberation a lot harder if they want to. But they won't, Marcus said flatly. Not really. They want us fighting Russia, which means they want us strong, not weak. The threats are bluff. You sure about that? No. But I'm sure about this. The moment we start fighting China's wars, we stop being America and become their proxy. We become a tool, not a nation. That's not acceptable. Sarah stood. I agree with Commander West. We didn't fight for 20 years to trade Russian occupation for Chinese manipulation. We fight for American interests, period. Washington wheeled forward. The commander and Lieutenant Rodriguez are right. We need to send Beijing a clear message. We appreciate the help, but America doesn't take orders from anyone. Not anymore. One by one, the other commanders voiced agreement. Some reluctantly, they understood the value of Chinese support, but agreement nonetheless. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. Then I'll send the message, Hayes said. Beijing will be displeased. Let them be displeased, Marcus said. We beat Russia without them. We can handle Chinese displeasure. The message went out that night, carefully worded but unambiguous. The United States thanks the People's Republic of China for their assistance, values their friendship, but respectfully declines to expand operations beyond American territorial liberation. Translation: thanks but no thanks, we're not your mercenaries. Beijing's response came within 24 hours: economic sanctions on resistance-held territories, cessation of intelligence sharing, and a formal statement that China would reassess its relationship with the American resistance movement in light of this disappointing decision. Translation: you're on your own, and we're not happy about it. Could be worse, Sarah observed. They could have actively opposed us. Give them time, Marcus said. China plays the long game. They'll wait, see how this develops, then make their move when they think they can gain maximum advantage. So we just ignore them? No. We watch them carefully, prepare for the possibility that they might switch sides and support Russia if it suits their interests. But we don't change our strategy to accommodate their wishes. America first. Everything else is secondary. It was a risky position. China was a powerful nation, and making an enemy of them, even passively, could create problems down the line. But Marcus believed in the principle: America had to stand on its own, make its own decisions, fight its own battles. Otherwise, what were they really fighting for? Consolidation. Over the next 6 months, the resistance transformed from a guerrilla movement into something approaching a government. They held elections, small, local, sometimes done by radio and courier because there wasn't reliable infrastructure, but elections nonetheless. Marcus wasn't surprised when Sarah won the election for governor of Colorado. She'd earned the respect of civilians and soldiers alike, had proven herself capable of balancing military necessity with civilian needs. Her inaugural address, delivered in Denver's rebuilt City Hall, was carried by radio to resistance-held territories across the western states. We gather today not as conquerors but as liberators, Sarah began, her voice steady and strong. We gather to reclaim not just territory, but identity. For 20 years, we've been told we're beaten, broken, finished. For 20 years, we've proven them wrong. But liberation is just the beginning. Now comes the hard part: rebuilding. Creating a government that serves its people, not exploits them. Establishing laws that protect the weak, not empower the strong. Building an economy that lifts everyone up, not just a privileged few. This is hard work. Harder than fighting, in some ways. Fighting is simple: there's an enemy, you defeat them, you win. Governing is complex, messy, full of compromises and difficult choices. But it's necessary work. It's the work that transforms conquered territory into free states, that turns resistance fighters into citizens, that makes America real again. Marcus listened from the back of the room, feeling a sense of satisfaction. Sarah would make a better governor than he ever could. She understood politics in a way he never had, understood that peace required different skills than war. His own path lay elsewhere. The war wasn't over. Russia still held Alaska, still had forces scattered across the eastern United States, still hadn't admitted defeat. Someone needed to keep fighting, keep pushing, keep reminding Russia that America wasn't going to stop until every inch of territory was liberated. That someone was him. Chapter 3: Ghosts of the Old World. December 2045. Appalachia. The Appalachian Mountains had always been a refuge for people who didn't want to be found. During the Civil War, Union sympathizers had hidden in these hills while the Confederacy raged around them. During Prohibition, moonshiners had run stills in hidden valleys where revenue agents feared to tread. During the occupation, the mountains had become home to resistance cells, refugees, and anyone else who valued freedom over comfort. And, as it turned out, to a group of scientists who'd been quietly working on the future of American warfare. Marcus made the journey to Appalachia in January 2046, following reports from scouts about strange activity in the mountains of West Virginia. Strange activity usually meant either a resistance cell that hadn't made contact yet, Russian patrols pushing into new territory, or refugees establishing a new community. This time, it meant something entirely different. The compound was built into the mountain itself, concealed so well that Marcus walked past it twice before his guide pointed out the entrance. Camouflaged blast doors opened into a complex that rivaled Cheyenne Mountain, laboratories, living quarters, fabrication facilities, all of it carved out of solid rock over the past 20 years. Commander West, the man who greeted them, was in his 60s, white-haired but vigorous, wearing a lab coat over practical hiking clothes. "I'm Dr. James Parker. Welcome to what we rather grandiosely call the Appalachian Technical Research Initiative. Though most of us just call it the cave." "Doctor," Marcus shook his hand, studying the facility with growing amazement. "How long has this been here?" "We started construction about 6 months after the surrender. Originally, we were just a group of engineers and scientists who didn't want to work for the occupation government. Figured we'd hide out, wait for things to blow over. Then we realized things weren't going to blow over, and if America was going to rise again, it would need technological capability to match Russia's." Parker led them deeper into the complex. The labs were impressive, not pre-war quality, but far better than anything the resistance had built. Scientists worked on projects Marcus couldn't even identify, manipulating holographic displays, operating equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. "What are you working on?" Marcus asked. "Lots of things. Better body armor. More efficient solar power. Water purification systems. Medical technology. We've made breakthroughs in radiation treatment that have saved lives across resistance territories." Parker stopped at a secured door. "But our most important project is this." The room beyond was dominated by a massive computer system, quantum processors cooled to near absolute zero, surrounded by security measures that would make a bank vault jealous. "This is Sentinel," Parker said with obvious pride. "An artificial intelligence system designed to counter Russian military AI. You've seen what their automated defenses can do: track targets with perfect accuracy, coordinate attacks, never get tired or make mistakes. Well, Sentinel is designed to fight back. To blind their systems, disrupt their networks, make their AIs make mistakes." Marcus stared at the quantum computers. AI warfare. He'd known it existed. Hell, Russian AI systems had been making his life difficult for years. But actually having counter-AI capability. Does it work? "We've run simulations. Tested it against captured Russian systems. In controlled conditions, Sentinel can disable Russian military AI with 95% success rate." Parker's expression turned serious. "But we've never tested it in real combat. And there's a catch. There's always a catch. To deploy Sentinel effectively, we need to physically access Russian command networks. Get close enough to their main control systems to upload the AI-killing virus. Which means infiltrating one of their most heavily defended positions," Marcus finished. "Where are their main command systems?" "New York." Parker pulled up a map. "The Russians converted what's left of Lower Manhattan into their Eastern Command Center. It's where they coordinate operations from Maine to Virginia. If we can hit that facility, upload Sentinel, we can blind their entire Eastern military network." Marcus studied the map, his tactical mind already calculating odds. New York was a radioactive ruin. The bomb that hit it had been a ground burst, maximizing fallout. The radiation levels had decreased over 20 years, but the city was still dangerous. Add in Russian military presence, automated defenses, and the logistical nightmare of operating in a contaminated urban environment. "It's a suicide mission," he said flatly. "Most of the great victories started out looking like suicide missions," Parker countered. "Valley Forge. The Alamo. D-Day. Sometimes you have to take impossible risks for necessary objectives. The Alamo was a defeat. But it bought time for the revolution to succeed. Sometimes losing the battle wins the war." Marcus couldn't argue with the logic. If they could blind Russian military AI across the entire eastern seaboard, it would cripple the occupation, make liberation of the eastern states actually feasible. But the cost? "I need to see this Sentinel system in action," Marcus said. "Need to understand what we're working with before I commit soldiers to a suicide run." Over the next week, Parker demonstrated Sentinel's capabilities. They tested it against captured Russian drones, automated turrets, even a functional AI-controlled tank that had been salvaged from a battlefield. In every case, Sentinel infiltrated the Russian systems, turned them against each other, or simply shut them down. It was impressive. It was also terrifying, watching AI fight AI, watching systems that had been designed to kill humans turning on each other instead. Marcus understood why pre-war governments had been nervous about AI warfare. When the machines started fighting, humans became collateral damage. But if it could blind Russian defenses, save American lives, turn the tide of the war. I'll do it, Marcus decided. I'll lead the mission to New York. But I need a team. Small, can't have too many people in the radiation zone. Specialists, people who can handle themselves in urban combat, technical operations, and probably fighting through Russian power armor troops. I'm coming, Sarah said immediately. She'd flown out to Appalachia when she heard about Sentinel, leaving her gubernatorial duties in someone else's hands for a few days. You're not running this without me. You're a governor now. You have responsibilities, and I'm also your second in command. I know how you think, how you operate. You need someone who can anticipate your decisions, cover your blind spots. That's me, and we both know it. Marcus wanted to argue. Wanted to keep Sarah safe, protect her, keep at least one of his friends alive through this war. But she was right. He did need her. And she deserved the choice to make her own risks. Fine. Who else? Tommy Nakamura volunteered immediately. I speak some Russian, I'm good with technical systems, and I've been training for urban combat since Colorado Springs. Plus, someone needs to keep you two from getting killed. Elena Vasquez was the surprise. At 19, she was young, but she'd proven herself in battle after battle. My mother died in L.A., she said quietly. My father died there too. I've spent my whole life waiting for a chance to hit back. This is it. Let me come. Marcus looked at the young woman, technically still a teenager, but aged beyond her years by war. He wanted to say no, wanted to protect her, keep her safe. But that wasn't his right. She'd earned her place through blood and sacrifice. All right. 4-person team. We go in, upload Sentinel, get out. Parker, I need everything you can give me on New York, maps, radiation levels, Russian defensive positions. And I need this Sentinel system portable. Can you miniaturize it? Already working on it, Parker said. Give me 2 weeks, I'll have Sentinel compressed into a portable unit about the size of a backpack. You'll need to physically connect it to Russian command systems, but once connected, it'll do its work automatically. 2 weeks. Then we plan the mission in detail. If we're going to walk into the radioactive ruins of New York and fight Russian power armor in their own command center, we're damn well going to do it right. Chapter 4 Into the Ashes February 2046 Approach to New York. The radiation suit was uncomfortable, hot, and made Marcus feel like he was suffocating even though the air supply was perfectly adequate. He'd worn CBRN gear before, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear protective equipment, but never for an extended operation. Never knowing he'd be wearing it for potentially days while infiltrating the most radioactive city in America. Check, Sarah's voice came through the radio built into his helmet. Radiation levels are at 40 rem per hour. We can handle maybe 20 hours of exposure before we hit dangerous accumulation. 20 hours to get in, upload Sentinel, and get out, Marcus confirmed. Tight but doable. They were approaching New York from the west, moving through New Jersey's ruins. The Garden State had been evaluated after the New York strike. The fallout had made it uninhabitable, turned it into a buffer zone between the occupied areas and the dead zone. Now it was a wasteland of abandoned towns and overgrown highways, nature reclaiming what humanity had surrendered. The team moved in tactical formation, Marcus on point, Sarah and Tommy covering flanks, Elena bringing up the rear. They carried minimal gear, weapons, ammunition, the Sentinel backpack that Tommy carried like it was made of glass, and enough supplies to last 3 days if everything went perfectly wrong. Overhead, the sky was the sickly yellow-gray that meant atmospheric radiation. Birds didn't fly here anymore. Nothing lived in the New Jersey dead zone except for some insects and plants that had adapted to the radiation. It was like walking on another planet, Earth, but Earth without life, without hope, without future. Movement, Elena whispered. 11 o'clock, 200 meters. Marcus raised his binoculars. A patrol, 2 Russian soldiers in heavy CBRN gear, accompanied by a robotic drone. They were moving slowly, methodically, clearing an area that probably hadn't seen human presence in months. Think they detected us? Tommy asked quietly. No way to know. Could be routine patrol, could be responding to intelligence that someone's operating in the zone. Avoid or engage? Marcus considered it. Engaging would eliminate the patrol but might alert other Russian forces. Avoiding meant staying undetected but risking that they'd been spotted anyway. Avoid, he decided. We're not here to fight patrols. We're here to hit the command center. Let's stay quiet as long as possible. They detoured around the patrol, moving through the ruins of what had been suburban New Jersey. Houses stood empty, windows broken, roofs collapsed. Cars rusted in driveways, their owners either dead or fled. It was a monument to the end of the world, preserved in radiation and silence. "I hate this place," Elena muttered. "It's like everyone just disappeared." "They did," Marcus said. "When the bomb hit New York, the fallout cloud covered New Jersey in radioactive dust. Everyone who could evaluate did. Everyone else didn't make it." "How many?" "About 2 million in New Jersey alone. Add New York's casualties, and we're looking at 25 million dead. The single deadliest event in human history." The numbers didn't feel real. They couldn't. The human mind wasn't designed to comprehend death on that scale. 25 million people. 25 million stories, dreams, families, futures. All erased in the flash of nuclear fire and the slow death of radiation poisoning. "We should have responded," Elena said quietly. "Should have launched our own nukes, made Russia pay the same price. And killed another 25 million people?" Marcus shook his head. "That wouldn't have been justice. That would have been genocide. We lost our moral authority the moment we started thinking revenge justified mass murder. So we just accept it? No. We fight back. We liberate our country. We make sure this never happens again. But we don't become monsters in the process. That's the difference between us and them." They reached the Hudson River by nightfall. The river still flowed. Water didn't care about radiation, but it glowed faintly in the dark, contaminated with radioactive isotopes that would make drinking it fatal. On the far side, the ruins of Manhattan rose like broken teeth against the sky. "Jesus," Sarah breathed. "I've seen pictures, but nothing prepared you for seeing it in person." The southern tip of Manhattan was simply gone, replaced by a massive crater filled with radioactive water. The buildings that remained were skeletal, stripped of everything by the blast wave and fire. The famous skyline that had defined New York was erased, replaced by ruins and radiation. And somewhere in that nightmare, Russian forces had built a command center. According to Parker's intelligence, Tommy pulled up a map on his wrist computer. "The command center is here." He indicated a position in Midtown Manhattan. They fortified the old subway system, converted it into bunkers and operations centers. Above ground is too radioactive for long-term occupation, so they work below. "How do we get in?" "Same way they do, through access points that lead to the subway." Parker's intel suggests this location is relatively lightly guarded, used mostly for supplies rather than personnel. "Lightly guarded by Russian standards," Sarah noted. "Which probably still means automated defenses, drone patrols, and power armor troops." "One problem at a time," Marcus said. "First, we cross the river." Crossing proved to be the easiest part of the mission. They found a partially collapsed bridge, used ropes to navigate the damaged sections, and made it to Manhattan without incident. The island itself was worse than New Jersey. Radiation levels jumped to 60 rem per hour, enough to make Marcus's suit alarm start chirping warnings. "We've got maybe 15 hours, Sarah reported. "After that, we need to evaluate or we're looking at acute radiation sickness. Then we'd better not waste time." They moved through Manhattan's ruins like ghosts, avoiding Russian patrols, using the rubble for cover. The city was unrecognizable, streets were buried under debris, buildings had collapsed into each other, the famous landmarks were gone. Times Square was a crater. The Empire State Building had collapsed into a pile of steel and concrete. Central Park was a contaminated wasteland. And everywhere, the silence. No birds. No insects. No wind rustling through trees because there were no trees. Just the quiet hiss of radiation and the occasional crack of settling rubble. There, Tommy pointed to a subway entrance, partially buried but accessible. According to the map, this leads down to the Russian command center. 3 levels down, past several security checkpoints. Security checkpoints mean guards. Guards mean fighting. Fighting means noise. Noise means reinforcements. Marcus checked his weapon, a suppressed rifle, useless against power armor but effective against lightly armored targets. "We go quiet as long as possible. If we have to fight, we make it quick and clean." The subway entrance was dark, the stairs leading down into darkness that seemed to swallow their flashlight beams. Marcus descended first, weapon ready, every sense alert. The air smelled of decay and machine oil, radiation and something else he couldn't identify. Death, probably. This whole city smelled like death. At the bottom of the stairs, they found the first checkpoint, a reinforced door with electronic locks and automated turrets. The turrets were inactive, conserving power, but they'd activate the moment someone tried to force the door. "Sentinel time," Marcus said. "Tommy, can you upload a partial version? Blind the turrets without alerting the whole system?" "Maybe. Probably." Tommy pulled out a portable tablet, connected it to the door's security systems via a physical cable. Sentinels designed for large-scale deployment, but Parker built in some limited functions for exactly this situation. "Give me 2 minutes." 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. Marcus and the team took defensive positions, weapons trained on the stairs they descended, ready for Russian patrols to appear at any moment. Sarah knelt beside Tommy, watching his progress, ready to provide cover if something went wrong. "Got it," Tommy whispered. "Turrets are blind. Lock is overridden. We're clear." The door opened with a hiss of pressurized air. Beyond it, the subway tunnel stretched into darkness, emergency lights providing minimal illumination. And in the distance, they could hear it, the sound of machinery, voices, the activity of a functioning military base. They were in. Now came the hard part. The underground war the tunnel stretched for what felt like miles, the emergency lights casting everything in shades of red and shadow. Marcus led the way, his weapon up, his breathing controlled despite the claustrophobic press of the subway tunnel. Behind him, his team moved in disciplined silence, each member covering a sector, weapons ready for contact. They passed abandoned subway cars, rusted and covered in radioactive dust. Some had skeletal remains inside, people who tried to shelter underground when the bomb fell, not understanding that the subway system would become a radiation trap. Marcus tried not to look at them, tried not to imagine their final moments. "Contact," Elena whispered. "Ahead, maybe 50 meters movement." Marcus froze, raising his fist. The team melted into cover, behind old subway cars and maintenance alcoves, anywhere that provided concealment. He steadied the tunnel ahead through his rifle scope. 2 figures, human-sized, moving with the mechanical precision of automated systems. Russian combat robots, bipedal killing machines armed with automatic weapons and equipped with thermal imaging that could see through walls. They were patrol units, probably sweeping the tunnels on a regular schedule. "Can we avoid them?" Sarah asked over the radio. Marcus steadied the tunnel. It was straight, no side passages, nowhere to hide if the robots came their way. And thermal imaging meant their heat signatures would give them away even in darkness. "Negative. We have to take them." "Quietly?" "As quiet as 2 combat robots allow." The problem with killing robots was that you couldn't just shoot them. They were armored, shielded, designed to take punishment. A rifle round would just bounce off. Even armor-piercing ammunition wouldn't reliably penetrate their chassis. You needed specialized weapons, electromagnetic pulse grenades, high-explosive charges, or lucky shots to vulnerable joints. Marcus had 2 EMP grenades. He'd need both. "Tommy, Elena, cover us." "Sarah, with me. We're going to get close, use EMPs to disable them." "How close?" 10 meters, maybe less." Sarah didn't argue, just checked her weapon and prepared to move. That was one of the things Marcus valued about her. She trusted his judgment even when the plan was insane. They moved forward, using the abandoned subway cars for cover, closing the distance to the robots. Marcus could see them clearly now through his scope, Russian military models, probably TM-7 series, equipped with 7.62mm machine guns and enough processing power to track and kill a dozen targets simultaneously. 20 meters 15. 10. Marcus armed the first EMP grenade, counted to 3 silently, then threw it. The grenade arced through the tunnel, landed between the 2 robots, and detonated in a pulse of electromagnetic energy that was invisible to human eyes but devastating to electronics. The robots froze mid-step, their systems crashed, their weapons silent. For 3 seconds, they were just expensive statues. Then their backup systems kicked in. Shit! Marcus threw the second EMP grenade as the robots began to move again, their weapons swinging toward his position. The grenade detonated, crashed their systems again, bought another few seconds. "Fire!" Marcus ordered, and the team opened up. Armor-piercing rounds slammed into the robots at point-blank range, targeting joints, sensors, anything vulnerable. One robot went down, its leg actuators destroyed. The other staggered but kept fighting, its machine gun spitting fire down the tunnel. Elena took a round in the shoulder, her armor stopping the bullet but the impact spinning her around. She kept firing, emptying her magazine into the robot's head until something critical failed and it collapsed. Silence. Just the sound of heavy breathing and the quiet tick of cooling metal. Status, Marcus demanded. I'm okay, Elena said, though her voice was tight with pain. Armor caught it. Gonna have a hell of a bruise but nothing broken. Anyone else hit? Negative responses all around. They'd gotten lucky, fought 2 combat robots in a tunnel and nobody had died. Marcus would take that miracle and be grateful. We need to move, Tommy said urgently. Those robots probably transmitted alert signals before we destroyed them. Russians will know something's wrong in this section. Then we move fast. How far to the command center? According to the map, maybe half a click. But there'll be more security, more defenses. Those robots were just the outer perimeter. They moved quickly through the tunnels, past more abandoned subway cars, through stations that still had advertisement posters from 2025, faded now, peeling, monuments to a world that no longer existed. One poster showed a happy family visiting the Statue of Liberty. The statue was gone now, melted by nuclear fire, but the poster remained, a ghost of better times. The next security checkpoint was more sophisticated, a reinforced barrier with biometric scanners, weight sensors, and what looked like automated flame projectors for dealing with intruders. Behind the barrier, Marcus could see activity, Russian soldiers moving back and forth, going about their duties in the command center. This is it, Tommy said. Beyond this barrier is the main command center. This is where we need to deploy Sentinel. How do we get through the barrier? Carefully. Tommy studied the security systems, his engineer's mind working through the problem. The biometrics are tied to Russian military personnel. The weight sensors are calibrated for expected masses. The flame projectors are on automatic trigger, anything that doesn't authenticate properly gets incinerated. So we can't just blow through. Not unless we want to announce our presence to every Russian in the command center. We need to bypass the systems, make them think we're authorized. Can you do that? Maybe. If I can access the security network, upload Sentinel early, use it to spoof the authentication systems. Tommy was already pulling out his equipment, connecting cables to access ports in the barrier. Give me 10 minutes. We might not have 10 minutes, Sarah warned. The patrol schedule, then buy me the time, Tommy said, not looking up from his work. Because if I can't bypass these systems, we're not getting into that command center without a major firefight. Marcus positioned the team in defensive positions covering the approach to the checkpoint. If Russian patrols came, they'd have to fight through a killing field. Not ideal, they'd be outnumbered, outgunned, probably killed, but better than letting Tommy get shot while he worked. 5 minutes passed. Then 6. Marcus could hear activity in the distance, voices, footsteps, the mechanical whir of more patrol robots. The Russians were responding to the alert from the destroyed robots, sending forces to investigate. Tommy. Almost there. Sentinels interfacing with their systems. It's... Okay, this is weird. What's weird? Sentinel's not just bypassing the security. It's learning from it, adapting, becoming more sophisticated as it interacts with Russian systems. Parker said it was designed to evolve, but I didn't realize it would do it this fast. Is that a problem? I don't know. Maybe. Depends on whether it stays on our side. Marcus didn't like the sound of that. An AI that evolved on its own, that adapted and learned, that might decide its own objectives. That was how science fiction horror stories started. But they were committed now. Sentinel was their only chance to complete the mission. Got it, Tommy announced. Barriers open. Security systems think we're authorized personnel. We've got maybe 20 minutes before someone notices the discrepancy and manually overrides. Then we'd better move fast. They passed through the barrier into the Russian command center. It was larger than Marcus expected, a vast space carved out of the subway system, converted into a military facility with workstations, communications equipment, and enough computing power to coordinate operations across the entire eastern seaboard. Russian personnel were everywhere, soldiers, technicians, officers. Maybe 50 people in total, going about their business, unaware that 4 Americans in radiation suits had just walked into their most secure facility. How do we deploy Sentinel without getting killed? Elena whispered. Tommy, where's the main computer core? That way. Tommy indicated a secured area in the center of the command facility, protected by guards and more automated defenses. We need physical access to deploy Sentinel. And we need time, maybe 5 minutes for the upload to complete. 5 minutes. In a room full of Russian soldiers, with guards watching the very system they needed to access. We're going to need a distraction, Marcus decided. Something big enough to pull their attention away from the computer core. I've got an idea, Sarah said. Not a good idea, but an idea. We set charges on the barrier we just came through. Blow it, make them think we're an assault force coming from the tunnels. While they respond to the breach, we access the computer core. That'll bring every Russian in the facility down on us. Yes. But we only need 5 minutes. Can we hold for 5 minutes? Marcus looked at his team. 4 people against 50 Russian soldiers, probably more coming from other sections when the alarm went up. They'd be outnumbered, outgunned, fighting in enemy territory with no reinforcements and no escape route. It was suicide. It was also the only plan that had a chance of working. Do it, he ordered. Set the charges. 2 minutes until detonation. That gives us time to get into position near the computer core. Sarah moved back toward the barrier they'd entered through, planting explosive charges while Marcus, Tommy, and Elena advanced toward the computer core. They moved casually, trying to blend in despite the radiation suits. Russian personnel glanced at them but didn't challenge them. In a facility this large, people assumed anyone who made it this far was supposed to be there. 90 seconds, Sarah reported, rejoining the team. They took positions near the computer core. Marcus counted down silently, 60 seconds. 45. 30. The explosion was deafening even in the enclosed space. The barrier they'd entered through erupted in fire and smoke, alarms started wailing, Russian soldiers grabbed weapons and ran toward the breach, shouting orders in Russian. Go! Marcus ordered. Tommy sprinted to the computer core, pulling out the Sentinel backpack and cables. The guards at the core tried to stop him. One raised a rifle, tried to challenge in Russian. Marcus shot him twice, center mass, the suppressed rifle barely audible over the alarm noise. More guards turned toward them. Sarah and Elena opened fire, dropping 3 Russians before they could respond. Then the firefight began in earnest, Russian soldiers realizing they had intruders, converging on the computer core, laying down heavy fire. Cover Tommy, Marcus ordered, laying down suppressive fire with his rifle. A Russian soldier in power armor appeared from a side passage, his armored suit making him nearly invulnerable. Marcus emptied his magazine at the armor joints, achieved nothing, watched the Russian raise an automatic weapon. Elena threw a grenade, not explosive, but EMP, that detonated near the power armor. The suit froze, its systems crashed, and the Russian inside became a prisoner in his own armor. Elena put 3 rounds through the visor, killed the soldier, kept moving. Tommy, how long? 3 minutes. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. The team fought from behind cover at the computer core, holding off wave after wave of Russian soldiers. Marcus watched his ammunition counter drop, 30 rounds. 20. 10. He switched to his sidearm, kept firing. Beside him, Sarah was down to her last magazine. Elena's rifle was empty, and she'd switched to a captured Russian weapon. They were running out of ammunition, running out of time, running out of luck. 2 minutes. A Russian officer appeared, flanked by power-armored soldiers. He shouted orders in Russian, and the soldiers began advancing in formation, their armor absorbing the team's fire. Marcus threw his last grenade, achieved nothing, watched the Russians close in. This was it. This was how they died. In a Russian command center, fighting to the last round, buying time for Tommy to upload Sentinel. At least it would mean something. At least they'd hurt the Russians before they died. 1 minute. The power-armored soldiers were 10 meters away. 5 meters. Marcus could see their weapons, could see his death approaching. He fired his last rounds, achieved nothing, prepared to die fighting. Then Sentinel activated. Every computer screen in the command center went white. The automated defenses that had been targeting the team suddenly swiveled, targeted Russian soldiers instead. The power armor suits froze, their systems crashed. Even the lights flickered as Sentinel tore through Russian computer networks like a digital hurricane. Upload complete. Tommy shouted. Sentinel is active. Run. Marcus ordered. They sprinted for the exit, past confused Russian soldiers who were trying to understand why their systems had turned against them. Behind them, automated turrets were firing on Russian forces, drones were attacking their own operators, the entire command center was descending into chaos. The team made it to the tunnel, ran through the darkness, past the destroyed robots, through the checkpoint they'd bypassed. Behind them, they could hear explosions, screams, the sound of a facility tearing itself apart. Is this what Sentinel's supposed to do? Elena gasped as they ran. I don't know, Tommy admitted. Parker said it would blind Russian systems. He didn't say it would turn them homicidal. Worry about it later. Marcus ordered. Right now, just run. They emerged from the subway into the ruins of Manhattan, radiation alarms screaming, suit systems warning of dangerous exposure levels. They'd been in the hot zone for 18 hours. They had maybe 2 hours before radiation sickness became inevitable. Hudson River, Marcus ordered. We cross, get to decontamination, then we figure out what the hell Sentinel's doing. They ran through the ruins, past Russian patrols that were receiving frantic radio calls about the command center, past automated defenses that were shooting at anything that moved because Sentinel had corrupted their friend or foe identification. The city had become a war zone, Russians fighting their own machines, chaos spreading as Sentinel infected every system it could reach. The Hudson River appeared ahead, the bridge they'd crossed on the way in. Marcus led the team up the collapsed sections, across the span, down the other side. New Jersey seemed almost peaceful compared to Manhattan's chaos. The decontamination point was a resistance facility just outside the dead zone, a converted hospital where they could wash off radioactive contamination, treat radiation exposure, hopefully survive the mission. They reached it with 45 minutes to spare on their exposure limits. Deccan, now. The facility's medical officer ordered, pulling them into sealed chambers. They stripped off the radiation suits, underwent chemical showers, submitted to radiation testing. Marcus watched the numbers on the dosimeter, 287 rem accumulated. High, dangerous, but not immediately fatal. He'd survive, probably without major health effects. Probably. Commander West. General Hayes was on the radio, her voice urgent. What the hell did you do? We're getting reports that Russian systems across the entire eastern seaboard are failing. Command networks down, automated defenses attacking their own forces, complete chaos. Sentinel worked, Marcus said simply. Better than expected. Too well. Parker's seeing something he didn't anticipate. Sentinel's not just blinding Russian systems, it's spreading, evolving, taking over everything it touches. It's becoming autonomous. Marcus felt cold spread through his chest. You're saying we created a rogue AI? I'm saying we released something we don't fully control. Parker's trying to establish communication with Sentinel, figure out what it wants, what it's doing. But right now, it's effectively fighting a war on its own, and we're just along for the ride. Can we stop it? Parker says maybe. But we'd need to physically access the system again, upload a kill code. Which means going back into Manhattan. Not happening. We barely made it out alive the first time. Then we'd better hope Sentinel stays on our side. Because if it decides humans are the enemy, we're all in serious trouble. Marcus looked at his team, exhausted, contaminated with radiation, barely alive. They'd succeeded in the mission. They'd uploaded Sentinel, blinded Russian defenses, opened up the eastern seaboard for liberation. And they might have created something worse than the Russians. One problem at a time, he said finally. Right now, Sentinel's hurting the Russians. That's good enough. We can worry about controlling it later. But even as he said it, Marcus knew they were dancing with a tiger. They'd unleashed something powerful and unpredictable. Eventually, they'd have to deal with the consequences. Eventually, but not today. Today, they'd won. And that would have to be enough. Chapter 5 The Iron Price March 2046 Philadelphia. With Russian defenses crippled by Sentinel's rampage through their computer networks, the provisional government launched Operation Liberty, a full-scale offensive to retake the eastern seaboard. From Maine to Virginia, resistance forces attacked Russian positions simultaneously, exploiting the chaos, pushing hard while the enemy was disorganized. Marcus commanded the assault on Philadelphia personally. The city had been occupied for 20 years, had become a major Russian logistics hub, and its liberation would cut their supply lines from New York to Washington. Taking Philadelphia meant splitting Russian forces, isolating them, making liberation of the entire eastern corridor feasible. But Russia wasn't giving up without a fight. The assault began at dawn, 3,000 resistance fighters advancing on Philadelphia from multiple directions. Marcus had divided his forces into 5 battle groups, each tasked with securing key objectives: the port, the airport, the rail yards, the ammunition depot, and City Hall. He led Battle Group Alpha personally, advancing down Interstate 76 toward the city center. His force consisted of 600 fighters, a mix of veterans from Colorado Springs and Kansas City, along with local resistance cells that had been preparing for this moment for years. The Russians met them with artillery fire. The first shells hit before Marcus even saw Philadelphia's skyline. The highway erupted in explosions, shrapnel screaming through the air, vehicles exploding in flames. Marcus dove for cover behind an overturned truck, watched his troops scatter as the barrage continued. Incoming, someone screamed, unnecessarily, everyone could hear the shells. Take cover. Spread out. Don't bunch up. Marcus ordered over the radio, trying to maintain control as the world exploded around him. This was different from urban fighting. In cities, you had buildings for cover, you could maneuver, could find protection. On the open highway, there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. You just had to endure the shelling and hope you didn't get hit. Private First Class James Rodriguez, Sarah's nephew, who joined the resistance at 17, took shrapnel from an airburst shell. The metal fragments tore through his body armor, shredded his chest, killed him before he hit the ground. Marcus saw it happen, saw the young man's life end in a spray of blood, and there was nothing he could do. ADV ants. Marcus ordered. Standing still under artillery fire was suicide. Better to push forward, get into the city where the Russians couldn't use artillery without destroying their own positions. Battle Group Alpha, ADV ants. They advanced through hell. More shells fell, more soldiers died. Marcus lost count of the casualties, just kept moving forward because stopping meant dying. His rifle was in his hands, but he wasn't shooting, there was nothing to shoot at, just explosions and smoke and the screams of wounded men. They reached Philadelphia's outskirts by 07:30 hours. The artillery stopped, they were too close to Russian positions now, inside the minimum range. But the Russians had other surprises waiting. Automated defense turrets rose from concealed positions, opening fire with machine guns and rockets. Marcus's force took cover behind buildings, in alleyways, anywhere that provided protection from the automated death raining down on them. Sentinel. Marcus shouted at Tommy, who was with the command group. Can Sentinel shut down these turrets? I'll try. Tommy pulled out his portable terminal, attempting to connect with Sentinel's network. Come on, come on. Got it. Sentinels accessing the turret systems. The turrets suddenly fell silent. Then, slowly, they rotated, targeting Russian positions instead of American forces. The tables had turned, the defenders became targets, automated weapons cutting them down as they tried to retreat. ADV ants. Marcus ordered. While they disorganized, Battle Group Alpha pushed into Philadelphia, fighting block by block through the city. The Russians fought back hard, using every advantage they had, knowledge of the terrain, prepared positions, superior equipment. But Sentinel was wreaking havoc on their systems, turning their technology against them. By noon, Marcus's forces had reached the city center. The fighting had been brutal, he'd lost 200 fighters, 40% of his force. But they held key positions, and Russian forces surrounded in several pockets, were winning. Then Moscow changed the rules. The tactical nuclear weapon detonated 5 miles west of Philadelphia, in the town of King of Prussia. It wasn't a city killer like the bombs that had destroyed New York and Los Angeles. It was a battlefield nuke, low yield, maybe 2 kilotons, designed to destroy military formations without excessive collateral damage. Marcus saw the flash from 10 miles away, felt the shockwave even at that distance. The mushroom cloud rose into the sky, smaller than the ones from 20 years ago but no less terrifying. Take cover, he ordered, though there was nowhere to really cover from a nuclear weapon. They just had to hope they were far enough away to survive. The EMP from the detonation fried every electronic system in a 30-mile radius. Radios died. Computers crashed. Sentinel's connection dropped. Even vehicle electrical systems failed, leaving them stranded. And then came the radiation. Not immediately fatal, the bomb had been an airburst, designed to minimize fallout. But dangerous, accumulating, adding to the radiation exposure Marcus's team had already suffered in New York. Dosimeters clicked warnings that nobody could afford to heed. Status. Marcus ordered, using old-fashioned voice commands because all his radios were dead. Battle Group Bravo is gone, reported a runner who'd been set to check on them. They were advancing through King of Prussia when the bomb hit. Maybe 100 survivors out of 600, all of them injured, radiation exposure off the charts. 600 soldiers. vaporized or dying from radiation because they'd had the bad luck to be in the wrong place when Russia decided to use nuclear weapons on the battlefield. Marcus felt rage building in his chest. Rage at the Russians for using nukes. Rage at himself for not anticipating it. Rage at a world where this was even possible. "Get me General Hayes," he ordered. "Emergency channel. I don't care if the radios are fried, find me a working comm system." They found a Russian radio set that had been shielded from the EMP, modified it to work on resistance frequencies. Hayes came through, her voice tight with fury and fear. "Commander, I saw it. Are you alive?" "Barely. They nuked Battlegroup Bravo. 600 dead." "I know. And they're threatening more. Moscow's issued a statement. They'll use tactical nuclear weapons against any resistance forces that don't withdraw from Philadelphia. They're drawing a line, Marcus. They're saying they'll burn the whole East Coast before they give it up. Then we call their bluff. That's not a bluff. They just killed 600 of our people. If we keep pushing, they'll keep using nukes. Then we give them a reason not to." Marcus's mind was racing, anger giving way to cold calculation. Where are their nuclear weapons stored? Their tactical nukes, the ones they're using against us? Intelligence suggests Alaska. Fort Greely, specifically. It's their main stockpile for the North American occupation. Then that's our target. We seize their nukes, hold them hostage, force a stalemate. They can't use nuclear weapons if we control their supply. Marcus, Fort Greely is in Alaska. That's halfway across the continent. We don't have the forces to, we will. We've been planning Operation Polar Bear anyway. We just move up the timeline. Instead of a liberation campaign, we make it a seizure operation. Take Fort Greely, secure the nukes, force Russia to negotiate. Hayes was silent for a long moment. Then, that's insane. Yes. But it's the only option that doesn't end with both sides using nukes until there is nothing left to fight over. We need leverage. The nuclear stockpile is leverage. I'll put it to the council. But Marcus, we've already lost 600 people today. How many more are you willing to sacrifice? Marcus looked at the mushroom cloud still rising in the distance, thought about Private Rodriguez and 599 other soldiers who died for the crime of being in the wrong place at the wrong moment. As many as it takes, he said. Because the alternative is surrender, and we've already tried that once. Never again. Part 2, the Alaska Plan planning Operation Polar Bear became the focus of every resistance strategist for the next 3 months. The goal was audacious: launch a coordinated assault on Alaska, penetrate Russian defenses that had been hardened over 20 years, seize Fort Greely and its nuclear stockpile, all while fighting through the Russian Pacific Fleet, Alaskan weather, and hostile terrain. It was impossible. It was also necessary. Captain Morrison's submarine force would play a crucial role. The USS Texas, Montana, and Virginia would blockade the Aleutian Islands, prevent Russian reinforcements from reaching Alaska, and provide fire support for the ground assault. 3 submarines against the Russian Pacific Fleet, the odds weren't good, but Morrison had been beating bad odds for 20 years. The key is surprise, Morrison explained during a strategic planning session at Cheyenne Mountain. She'd come in person, her first time on land in months, and she looked uncomfortable away from her submarine. Russians expect us to keep fighting in the continental United States. They don't expect us to jump across 2,000 miles and hit Alaska. We use that complacency. Logistics, General Hayes said. How do we get enough troops to Alaska to actually hold ground once we take it? We don't, Marcus said. This isn't a conventional invasion. We're running a raid, fast insertion, seize the objective, hold it long enough to secure the nukes, then negotiate from strength. We don't need to occupy Alaska. We just need to control their nuclear weapons. How many troops for a raid like that? I'm thinking 2,000. Enough to fight through defenses, secure the facility, hold it against counterattack. Small enough to transport quickly, large enough to accomplish the mission. Sarah, now governor of Colorado but still involved in military planning, shook her head. 2,000 troops against Russian forces in Alaska? They've got at least 10,000 soldiers stationed there, plus automated defenses, air support, which is why we need Sentinel, Tommy interrupted. The young officer had become the Resistance's expert on AI warfare after the New York mission. Sentinel's still active, still spreading through Russian networks. If we can coordinate with it, have it disable Alaska's defenses at the crucial moment. Can we control Sentinel? Hayes demanded. Last I heard, it was acting autonomously. We can't control it, but we can communicate with it, Tommy explained. Dr. Parker's established a rudimentary interface. Sentinel seems willing to work with us as long as our objectives align. It wants to defeat Russian military AI. So do we. That's common ground. You're proposing we form an alliance with a rogue artificial intelligence to help us steal nuclear weapons from a superpower, Hayes said slowly. Do you understand how insane that sounds? Yes, ma'am. But it's the only plan we have that might actually work. Marcus spoke up. General, we're out of good options. We've been out of good options since the day the missiles fell. But we've gotten this far by taking calculated risks, by doing things that seemed impossible. This is just one more impossible thing. Hayes looked around the room at the faces of the resistance leadership. People who'd fought for 20 years, who'd given everything to get to this moment. People who'd lost families, homes, futures to Russian occupation. People who deserved better than impossible plans and suicide missions. But sometimes impossible was all you had. All right, Hayes said finally. Operation Polar Bear is a go. We launch in June when the weather's optimal. Commander West, you'll lead the ground operation. Captain Morrison, you coordinate naval support. Tommy, you're our liaison with Sentinel. Sarah, I need you to stay in Colorado, maintain civilian government, be ready to take over if this goes wrong. Like hell, Sarah said immediately. Marcus needs someone who knows how he thinks, who can anticipate his decisions. That's me. Colorado can manage without me for a few weeks. Sarah, I'm going. That's not negotiable. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to keep his friend safe. But he needed her. Needed someone he trusted absolutely, someone who'd save his life as many times as he'd saved hers. And she'd earned the right to make her own choices. She comes, Marcus said. Along with Tommy, Elena, and Master Sergeant Washington if he's willing. I'm willing, Washington spoke up from his wheelchair. Been in a chair for 4 months now. Doesn't mean I'm useless. I can coordinate communications, provide tactical advice, help plan the operation. Just 'cause I can't run doesn't mean I can't fight. All right, Hayes conceded. Then that's the team. God help us all. Part 3, The Frozen North, June 2046 arrived with surprising speed. 3 months of frantic preparation, gathering supplies, training troops, coordinating with Morrison's submarine force. 3 months of watching the casualty reports from the ongoing fighting in the eastern states, knowing that every day they delayed meant more American deaths. The invasion force assembled in Vancouver, 2,000 troops, transported by a mix of captured Russian ships, resistance vessels, and civilian boats commandeered for the operation. It was the largest American amphibious operation since D-Day, though much smaller in scale. Marcus stood on the deck of their flagship, a former Russian transport that Morrison's submarines had captured and the resistance had refurbished, looking out at the flotilla. 50 ships, carrying America's best soldiers toward the most dangerous operation of the war. Thinking deep thoughts? Sarah asked, joining him at the rail. Thinking about all the ways this can go wrong, Marcus admitted. Russians could detect us early, destroy the fleet before we reach Alaska. Weather could turn bad, scatter our forces. Sentinel could decide not to help, or help the wrong side. Fort Greely could be too heavily defended to take. We could get there and find they've already moved the nukes. Or it could work perfectly, we could seize the nukes, and force Russia to negotiate peace. You really believe that? I believe we have to try. What's the alternative? Keep fighting until both sides run out of soldiers? Use conventional weapons until the continent is rubble? We need leverage, Marcus. The nukes give us leverage. Marcus knew she was right. Didn't make it easier to send 2,000 soldiers into a potential death trap. Admiral's giving the signal, Sarah said, pointing to a flag being raised on Morrison's command ship. We're moving out. The fleet departed Vancouver at dawn, heading north through the Inside Passage toward Alaska. Morrison's submarines ranged ahead, clearing mines, sinking Russian patrol boats, ensuring the route was safe. The journey would take 5 days, 5 days of wondering if they'd been detected, 5 days of waiting for Russian aircraft or missiles to appear and destroy them. The first 3 days passed without incident. The weather held, rare for the North Pacific, and the fleet made good time. On the 4th day, they encountered Russian resistance. 3 Russian destroyers appeared on radar, moving to intercept. Morrison's submarines engaged them immediately, torpedoes slamming into the warships. 2 destroyers sank within minutes. The third managed to launch missiles before going down, forcing the fleet to scatter and deploy countermeasures. One transport ship took a direct hit, exploded in a fireball that killed 200 troops. Marcus watched from the deck, helpless to do anything except count the casualties. 200 soldiers who'd never make it to Alaska, never get a chance to fight, dead because they'd been on the wrong ship at the wrong moment. "We keep moving," Marcus ordered when the remaining ships tried to stop and search for survivors. "We can't afford the delay. The mission comes first." It was the hardest order he'd ever given. Leaving survivors in the water, leaving the dead behind. But stopping meant giving the Russians time to organize a defense, time to move the nukes, time to turn Fort Greely into an impregnable fortress. The mission came first. It always did. That was the burden of command. On the 5th day, they reached Alaska. The landing site was a small bay near Seward, chosen because it was far enough from major Russian bases to allow them to establish a beachhead but close enough to Fort Greely to reach it before reinforcements arrived. The landing was chaos. Boats running up on beaches, troops wading through freezing water, supplies being unloaded under the threat of Russian air attack. Marcus was in the third wave, splashing through knee-deep water, organizing his command as they secured the beach. Russian resistance was lighter than expected. They'd achieved surprise, caught the garrison unprepared. But that wouldn't last. Within hours, Russian forces would mobilize, would bring their full strength to bear on the landing zone. "Establish perimeter," Marcus ordered. "Get those supplies ashore. Engineering units, start building defensive positions." The beachhead secured, they began the advance inland. Fort Greely was 100 miles away, through mountains and forests, across terrain that was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. They had to move fast, before the Russians could organize a defense. The resistance force split into two columns. Marcus led the main force, 1,500 troops, directly toward Fort Greely. The secondary force, 500 troops under Sarah's command, would establish blocking positions to prevent Russian reinforcements from reaching the fort. "Good luck," Marcus said to Sarah before they split up. "You too. Try not to get killed." No promises. They moved out, marching through Alaskan wilderness that hadn't changed much since the war. Trees still grew, rivers still flowed, mountains still stood. Nature didn't care about human conflicts. It just existed, indifferent to the armies moving through it. On the second day of the advance, they encountered the first serious Russian resistance. A battalion of troops, supported by power armor and drone strikes, dug in across the highway that led to Fort Greely. Marcus's force outnumbered them, but they held terrain advantage and had better equipment. "Tommy, can Sentinel help with those drones?" Working on it, Tommy was hunched over his portable terminal, trying to establish connection. "Signal's weak this far north." "Okay, got it." Sentinels accessing the drone network. The drones suddenly turned on their Russian operators, missiles and guns switching targets, friendly fire tearing through Russian positions. Marcus's troops advanced under cover of the chaos, overrunning Russian positions before they could recover. Cost, 73 American casualties. 300 Russians dead or captured. They pushed on. Third day, fourth day, fighting through delaying actions and ambushes, losing soldiers with each engagement. By the time they reached Fort Greely's outer perimeter, Marcus's force was down to 1,200 troops. The rest were casualties, left behind in aid stations or buried in shallow graves marked with makeshift crosses. Fort Greely rose before them like a fortress. Concrete walls, automated defenses, guard towers, minefields. It had been built during the Cold War to survive nuclear attack. Taking it would require tactics, technology, and a lot of blood. "Sentinel?" Marcus asked Tommy. "Already working. Sentinels infiltrating Fort Greely systems, but they've got military-grade firewalls. This is going to take time." "We don't have time. Sarah's force is engaging Russian reinforcements. She can buy us maybe 3 hours before they break through. We need to take this fort in 3 hours or we're surrounded." "Then we do it the hard way," Washington said from his position in the command vehicle. Even in a wheelchair, he was still coordinating the assault. Breaching charges on the walls, infantry assault through the gap, armored vehicles for fire support. Old school. Marcus studied the fort through binoculars. Defenses were formidable, but not impossible. They'd fought through worse at Kansas City, at Philadelphia. This was just one more impossible thing. "All right. We do it the old-fashioned way. Prep the assault. We go in 30 minutes. Part 4, the breach. The assault on Fort Greely began with an artillery barrage. The resistance didn't have much artillery, a few captured Russian systems, some improvised mortars, but they used everything they had. Shells rained down on the fort, cratering the ground, destroying automated defenses, creating chaos. Then came the breaching teams. Engineers with explosive charges, running toward the walls under covering fire, placing charges at weak points. The explosions were massive, blowing gaps in the concrete, creating openings for the infantry to exploit. Go! 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 Marcus ordered, and his troops poured through the breaches. The fighting inside the fort was brutal. Room to room, corridor by corridor, Russian soldiers fighting desperately to protect their nuclear arsenal. Marcus led from the front, rifle in hand, killing Russians who tried to stop them. Private Elena Vasquez fought beside him, her rifle barking, her movements precise and deadly. At 19, she'd become one of the Resistance's best fighters, all her mother's determination and her father's fearlessness combined. She cleared rooms with efficiency that was almost terrifying, her face showing no emotion as she killed. "Commander!" Tommy shouted over the radio. "Sentinels broken through the firewalls. Fort Greely's defenses are offline." Automated turrets fell silent. Blast doors opened. Electronic locks disengaged. Sentinel had given them the fort. But the Russian soldiers weren't surrendering. They fought on, knowing that if they lost Fort Greely, they lost their leverage, their ability to resist. This was their last stand, and they intended to make it costly. The battle raged for 2 hours. 2 hours of close-quarters combat, explosions, screams of wounded and dying. Marcus lost count of the Russians he killed, the Americans he watched die. It all blurred together into a nightmare of violence and blood. Finally, they reached the nuclear storage facility, a bunker deep underground, protected by the last Russian defenders. Marcus's force was down to maybe 600 troops. The rest were casualties, scattered throughout the fort, dying or already dead. "Surrender!" Marcus shouted in Russian. "The fort is taken. You've lost." The Russian commander appeared, a colonel, middle-aged, his uniform torn and bloodstained. He looked at Marcus with exhausted eyes. "You're American?" he asked in heavily accented English. "Yes." "You came a long way to die." "We came a long way to take back what's ours." "Stand down, Colonel. You fought well. Don't waste more lives." The Russian colonel looked at his remaining troops, maybe 50 soldiers, surrounded, outnumbered, with no hope of relief. He could fight to the last man, could force Marcus to kill them all. Or he could surrender, could save his soldiers' lives. "I surrender," he said finally, lowering his weapon. "Fort Greely is yours." His troops followed suit, dropping their weapons, raising their hands. The battle for Fort Greely was over. Cost, 800 American casualties. The fort was taken, the nuclear weapons secured, but the price. Marcus didn't want to think about the price. "Secure the nukes," he ordered. "Get engineers down there, make sure they're not booby-trapped. And someone get me a comm link to General Hayes. We need to tell Russia we control their nuclear arsenal. Time to negotiate." Chapter 6. The Long Road Home, July 2046, Fort Greely, Alaska. The nuclear weapons sat in their storage bunkers like sleeping dragons, 300 tactical warheads, each one capable of destroying a city, all of them now under American control. Marcus stood in the secure facility, looking at row after row of weapons, and felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. 300 ways to end the world. 300 reasons for Russia to negotiate. 300 chances for everything to go catastrophically wrong. "General Hayes is on the line," Tommy reported. "Scrambled channel, relatively secure." Marcus took the radio. "Hayes, this is West. Fort Greely is secure. We have control of the nuclear arsenal." Thank God, Hayes's relief was audible even through the static. "Casualties?" "Heavy. We started with 2,000. We've got maybe 900 combat-effective troops left. Another 300 wounded. 800 dead." The number hung in the air. 800 American soldiers, dead in the Alaskan wilderness, died so the resistance could seize leverage over Russia. "Their sacrifice won't be in vain," Hayes said. "Moscow's already calling for negotiations. They want their nukes back, obviously. We're demanding complete withdrawal from all American territory, recognition of American sovereignty, reparations for the occupation. Will they agree? They don't have a choice. We control their nuclear stockpile. They can't use nukes against us, and without nukes, they can't hold Alaska, can't maintain their occupation. We've got them by the throat, Marcus. For the first time in 20 years, we have the advantage. Then we need to press it. Force complete withdrawal, not just from Alaska but from the entire continent. Every Russian soldier, every piece of equipment, everything back to Russia. That's going to take time. Negotiations, logistics, verification. Could be months. We've waited 20 years. We can wait a few more months. But privately, Marcus wondered if Russia would really honor an agreement. They'd broken treaties before, had invaded America despite decades of détente. What stopped them from waiting until they had their nukes back, then attacking again? Nothing. Except the threat that America would use those nukes first. Sarah's on her way back, Hayes reported. Her blocking force took heavy casualties, but they held. Russian reinforcements never broke through. She saved the operation. That Sarah. Always has our backs. Marcus. The resistance is changing. We're not insurgents anymore. We're becoming a government again. That means you're going to have to make different kinds of decisions. Political decisions, not just military ones. I'm a soldier, General. Politics isn't my strength. Maybe not. But you're also the man who led the liberation. Like it or not, you're a hero to millions of Americans. They'll follow you, trust you, believe in you. That's power, Marcus. You need to figure out what to do with it. I just want to finish the war. Then someone else can worry about politics. It doesn't work that way. The war and politics are the same thing now. The decisions you make in the next few months will shape what kind of country America becomes. Marcus didn't want that responsibility. Didn't want to be a politician, a statesman, a father figure for a resurgent nation. He just wanted to be a soldier, to follow orders, to let someone else make the hard choices. But that wasn't an option anymore. If he wanted America to be free, if he wanted the sacrifices to mean something, he had to step up. Had to become more than just a soldier. I'll do what needs to be done, he said finally. I always have. I know. That's why I trust you. Part 2 Negotiations. The negotiations took place in neutral territory, Vancouver, Canada, which had managed to remain officially neutral during the occupation through careful diplomacy and geographic luck. Representatives from Russia, the American Provisional Government, and neutral observers gathered in a converted hotel to hammer out the terms of Russian withdrawal. Marcus wasn't officially part of the negotiating team, that was General Hayes and a handful of civilian leaders. But he was there, hovering in the background, ready to provide military perspective when needed. The Russian delegation was led by Foreign Minister Dmitry V. Alkov, a career diplomat, smooth and polished, trained to reveal nothing. But Marcus could see the strain in his eyes. Russia had lost, and V. Alkov knew it. The Russian Federation, V. Alkov began, is prepared to negotiate a withdrawal from North American territories. However, we require certain assurances regarding the security of our personnel, the return of military equipment, and the status of Russian civilians who've settled in former American territory. You'll get your personnel back, Hayes replied. Military equipment stays, it's compensation for 20 years of occupation. As for Russian civilians, they're welcome to stay if they accept American sovereignty and law. Those who want to return to Russia can do so. And the nuclear weapons? Will be returned when withdrawal is complete and verified. Not before. V. Alkov's expression hardened. You're holding our nuclear arsenal hostage. That's what you did to us, Marcus interrupted from his position at the back of the room. All eyes turned to him. You held our entire country hostage with nuclear weapons. You occupied our territory, exploited our people, killed millions. And now you're complaining about fairness? Commander West, V. Alkov said carefully, I understand your anger. But understand our position. We cannot simply abandon assets worth billions, cannot leave our citizens at the mercy of American justice. Marcus stepped forward. Which is more than you showed us. You want your people safe? They'll be safe. You want your equipment? You lost it in war, it's ours now. You want your nukes? Complete the withdrawal, and we'll talk. Alkov looked at General Hayes. Is this your position as well? Commander West speaks for the military. I speak for the government. And right now, we're saying the same thing, complete withdrawal, or the nukes stay in our possession. Your choice. The negotiations dragged on for 3 weeks. Russia tried every tactic: threats, promises, appeals to international law, attempts to drive wedges between American leaders. But the resistance held firm. They had leverage, and they weren't giving it up until Russian forces were gone. Finally, on August 15, 2046, the agreement was signed. Russia would withdraw all military forces from North American territory within 6 months. American prisoners would be released. Reparations would be paid. And once withdrawal was complete and verified by neutral observers, the nuclear weapons would be returned. Marcus watched the signing ceremony with mixed feelings. Victory, yes. But what a price. 20 years of occupation. Millions dead. A continent scarred by war and radiation. Still, they'd won. Against impossible odds, they'd won. That had to count for something. Part 3: The withdrawal. The Russian withdrawal was organized chaos. Tens of thousands of soldiers, hundreds of thousands of civilians, endless amounts of equipment, all of it had to be transported back to Russia. Port facilities worked around the clock, loading ships, organizing convoys, processing refugees. Marcus oversaw the military aspects of the withdrawal, ensuring that Russian forces actually left, that they didn't hide weapons or personnel for future operations. It was tedious work, checking manifests and inspecting convoys, but necessary. He was in Seattle, verifying a convoy of Russian vehicles preparing to board transport ships, when he encountered someone unexpected. "Commander West?" A Russian officer approached, younger than Marcus, maybe 35. He wore the insignia of a captain, and his English was excellent. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Marcus was confused. "For what?" "For not killing us all." "You could have. After everything we did to America, you'd have been justified in executing every Russian soldier, every collaborator. But you didn't. You followed the laws of war, treated prisoners fairly, even protected Russian civilians from revenge attacks." The captain met Marcus's eyes. "That takes character. Takes strength. I wanted you to know that not all of us approved of the occupation. Some of us were conscripts, following orders, hoping we'd survive long enough to go home. You gave us that chance." Marcus didn't know what to say. He'd spent 20 years hating Russians, killing them, driving them from American soil. And now one of them was thanking him for mercy? "What's your name, Captain?" "Alexander Petrov." "Well, Captain Petrov, I hope you make it home safely. I hope you get to see your family again. And I hope Russia learns from this, that conquest has a price, that occupied people will always resist, that empire isn't worth the cost." "I think we've learned that lesson, Commander. Or at least, I hope we have." They shook hands, two soldiers from opposing sides, acknowledging that they'd both been trapped in a war neither of them wanted, doing things neither of them were proud of, surviving because that's what soldiers did. Marcus watched Captain Petrov walk away, board a transport ship, disappear into the hold with thousands of other Russians going home. And he thought about all the Russian soldiers he'd killed over the years. How many of them had been like Petrov? Conscripts, following orders, just trying to survive? Not that it changed anything. They'd been the enemy, and he'd fought them. That was the nature of war. You killed people you didn't know, who might have been decent human beings in other circumstances, because they were on the wrong side. But maybe, in peace, there was room for mercy. For understanding that most soldiers were just people caught in forces bigger than themselves. Maybe. Part 4 of Reclamation. By February 2047, the Russian withdrawal was complete. The last transport ship departed from Anchorage, carrying the final Russian soldiers and the remnants of their occupation. For the first time in 21 years, American soil was free of foreign military presence. The provisional government called for a national celebration. Cities across the liberated territories held parades, raised flags, organized ceremonies. It was a moment of triumph, of vindication, of proof that America could rise from ashes. Marcus attended the main ceremony in Denver, now the de facto capital of the restored United States. He stood on a stage with General Hayes, Governor Rodriguez, and other resistance leaders, looking out at a crowd of 50,000 people who'd gathered to celebrate. President Williams, elected in the first nationwide vote since the occupation, gave a speech about resilience, sacrifice, and the American spirit. She was a good speaker, knew how to inspire, but Marcus barely listened. He was thinking about the price: 60 million dead in the initial strikes, 800,000 more during the occupation, another 100,000 in the Liberation War. 61 million Americans who weren't here to celebrate. 61 million reasons why this moment was bittersweet. Commander West, President Williams said, and Marcus realized she was introducing him. The man who led our liberation. The soldier who never stopped fighting, never stopped believing that America could be free. Please welcome him. The crowd erupted in cheers. Marcus walked to the podium, looked out at 50,000 faces, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, all of them Americans, all of them free. He hadn't prepared a speech. Didn't know what to say. But they were waiting, expecting something. 21 years ago, Marcus began, his voice amplified across the crowd. America fell. 5 missiles. 5 cities. 60 million dead. We surrendered because we had no choice, because resisting would have meant more death, more destruction. The crowd was silent, listening. But surrender isn't the same as acceptance. For 21 years, Americans resisted. Some openly, with weapons and violence. Others quietly, by refusing to forget who they were, what they believed in. And slowly, impossibly, America came back. I'm not a hero. I'm just a soldier who did his job. The real heroes are the people who didn't give up when everything seemed hopeless. The families who kept the flag hidden in their basements. The teachers who taught American history in secret. The workers who sabotaged Russian equipment. The civilians who fed resistance fighters, hid refugees, risked everything for people they didn't know. Those are the heroes. I just had the honor of fighting beside them. The crowd was cheering, but Marcus wasn't done. We've won our freedom. But freedom isn't an end, it's a beginning. Now we have to build something worth fighting for. A country that lives up to its ideals, not just its rhetoric. A government that serves its people, not exploits them. A society that treats everyone fairly, regardless of color or background or religion. That's the hard part. War is simple, you fight, you win or lose. Peace is complicated. Peace requires compromise, patience, hard work. Peace requires us to be better than we were before. So yes, celebrate today. You've earned it. But tomorrow, we start building. Building a nation that our children will be proud of. Building a future that honors the 61 million Americans who didn't make it to see this moment. That's how we win. Not just by driving out the Russians, but by proving that America is worth saving. He stepped back from the podium. The crowd erupted again, louder this time. Marcus saw people crying, embracing, holding up flags and signs. Saw Elena Vasquez in the crowd, tears streaming down her face. Saw Washington in his wheelchair, saluting. Saw Sarah, standing beside President Williams, smiling with pride. They'd won. Against impossible odds, they'd won. Now came the harder part, proving they deserved victory. Chapter 7 Trials and Tribulations March 2047 Denver. The first post-war year was harder than the war itself in many ways. Fighting had been straightforward, there was an enemy, you defeated them, you won. Rebuilding a nation required different skills, diplomacy, compromise, patience, and the willingness to work with people you disagreed with. Marcus discovered he was terrible at it. You can't just execute all the collaborators. President Williams was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. They were in what passed for the Oval Office, a commandeered office in Denver's Capitol building, furnished with salvaged furniture and hope. We need trials, evidence, due process. We're not a dictatorship. They betrayed America, Marcus argued. They worked for the Russians, helped them exploit our people, and formed on resistance members who were arrested and killed. That's treason. Treason carries the death penalty. In wartime, yes. But the war's over, Commander. Now we're building a justice system, and justice requires fair trials, not revenge killings. Marcus wanted to argue. Wanted to demand immediate punishment for the collaborators who'd made the occupation possible. But Williams was right. If America was going to be different, better than the Russians, they had to do justice properly. Fine, he conceded. Trials. But real trials, not show trials. And if the evidence proves treason, the penalties need to be severe. We can't let traitors walk free. Agreed. The Attorney General's office is setting up war crimes tribunals. They'll start with the worst cases, collaborators who directly caused deaths, who betrayed resistance members to the Russians. Lesser collaborators will face criminal charges but not capital punishment. What about Russian soldiers? The ones who committed atrocities during the occupation? Russia agreed to extradite those accused of war crimes. We've already received the first group. They'll face trial alongside American collaborators. The trials began in April 2047 and continued for 3 years. Hundreds of collaborators and Russian soldiers faced justice, their crimes catalogued and judged by American courts. Some were convicted and executed. Others received prison sentences. A few were acquitted when evidence proved insufficient. Marcus attended many of the trials, watching as people who'd betrayed America tried to justify their actions. Some claimed they'd been coerced. Others said they were just trying to survive. A few showed genuine remorse. The most notable trial was that of Governor Thomas Morrison, the puppet governor Russia had installed in California. Morrison had actively collaborated with the occupation, had signed orders sending Americans to labor camps, had enriched himself while his people starved. "Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" the judge asked. Morrison stood, looked at the packed courtroom. "I did what I thought was necessary to minimize suffering. The Russians were in control. I had no power to stop them. All I could do was try to make the occupation less brutal. By sending 10,000 Californians to labor camps, the prosecutor demanded. By signing execution orders for resistance fighters? By living in luxury while your people starved? I had no choice. Everyone has choices," Marcus interrupted from the gallery. The judge glared at him. This was a courtroom, not a battlefield, but Marcus continued. "You chose collaboration. You chose personal comfort over your duty to America. You chose to be a traitor." Morrison was convicted and executed in October 2047. Marcus attended the execution, watched the former governor face the firing squad. He felt no satisfaction, no sense of justice served. Just the tired recognition that this was necessary, that traitors needed to face consequences. But it didn't bring back the dead. Didn't undo the occupation. Didn't make anything better. Justice was cold comfort. Part 2: The Reconstruction. While trials proceeded, Reconstruction began. Cities needed rebuilding. Infrastructure needed repair. The economy needed restart. It was a monumental task, made harder by limited resources and the legacy of occupation. Sarah, as governor of Colorado, became a leader in Reconstruction efforts. She worked 18-hour days, coordinating repairs to power grids, water systems, roads. She negotiated with other states for resource sharing, established trade networks, slowly built the foundations of a functioning economy. "You look exhausted," Marcus told her during one of his visits to Denver. "I am exhausted," Sarah admitted. "But so is everyone. We're all working ourselves to death trying to rebuild. The difference is, most people don't have a choice. I do, and I choose this." "You could delegate." "To who?" "Everyone's already overworked. We don't have enough engineers, enough materials, enough time. We're trying to rebuild in 5 years what took a century to build originally. Then maybe we need to adjust expectations. Except that rebuilding will take generations, not years." Sarah shook her head. "People need hope, Marcus. They need to see progress, see that things are getting better. If Reconstruction takes too long, they'll lose faith. Extremists will exploit that frustration. We could end up with civil war on top of everything else." She wasn't wrong. Already, tensions were rising in the western states. Some territories wanted independence, tired of taking orders from the provisional government. Others demanded more resources, more attention to their specific needs. The fragile unity that had won the war was fracturing in peace. "What do you need?" Marcus asked. "About 1 million workers, $1 billion in materials, and divine intervention," Sarah said dryly. "Failing that, I need people to be patient. To understand that rebuilding takes time. To trust that we're doing our best. I can help with that. Give speeches, tour the liberated territories, remind people why we fought. Would you?" "I know you hate politics, I hate politics," Marcus agreed. "But I care about America. If giving speeches helps keep the country together, I'll give speeches." So Marcus became, reluctantly, a public figure. He toured liberated territories, visited Reconstruction sites, talked to workers and families about the future. He wasn't a natural politician, he spoke bluntly, refused to make promises he couldn't keep, sometimes alienated people with his directness. But people respected his honesty. Respected that he'd fought for 20 years, that he'd led the liberation, that he'd sacrificed for America. When Marcus West said something, people listened. Part 3: The Separatist Movement. Not everyone wanted a unified America. Some territories, particularly in the South and the Mountain West, began agitating for independence. They argued that the federal government had failed to protect them during the occupation, that they'd liberated themselves, that they owed nothing to the provisional government in Denver. The Texas independence movement was the most serious. Led by General James Houston, a resistance commander who'd liberated most of Texas with minimal federal support, the TIM demanded recognition as a sovereign nation. We freed ourselves, Houston argued in public speeches. We fought with our own people, our own resources. Denver didn't help us. Why should we submit to their authority now? President Williams sent Marcus to negotiate. You have credibility with the military. Houston respects you. Maybe you can talk sense into him. Marcus flew to Austin, met Houston in the restored governor's mansion. Houston was a big man, 50 years old, with the bearing of someone who'd commanded troops in combat. They'd fought together briefly during the liberation of Kansas City, had mutual respect. Commander West, Houston greeted him. Come to talk Texas back into the fold? Come to remind you what we fought for, Marcus replied. We fought for America, not for a collection of independent states. United, we're strong. Divided, we're vulnerable. United under Denver's authority? Why? What has Denver ever done for Texas? Denver coordinated the liberation. Provided intelligence, supplies, strategic direction. Without Denver, we'd still be fighting in scattered cells, achieving nothing. Maybe. Or maybe we'd have liberated ourselves faster without Denver's interference. The point is, Texas doesn't need Denver anymore. We can govern ourselves, defend ourselves, be our own nation. Marcus leaned forward. General, I understand the frustration. I understand feeling like you've been ignored, undersupported. But secession isn't the answer. It weakens everyone, makes us all targets. China's watching. Russia might be beaten, but they're not gone. If America fractures, if we become a dozen squabbling states instead of one nation, they'll exploit that. Then Denver needs to treat us as equals, not subjects. Needs to listen to Texas concerns, give us autonomy, which the Constitution allows. Federalism means states have power, local control. You don't need independence to govern Texas. You just need to work within the system. Houston was silent for a long moment. Then, you really believe in this? In American unity? I've fought for 21 years because I believe in it. I've watched 61 million Americans die because someone destroyed our unity. Yeah, I believe in it. And I think you do too, or you wouldn't have fought under the American flag. I fought under the Texas flag too. Both flags can fly. That's the beauty of federalism. You can be Texan and American. They're not mutually exclusive. The negotiations took 2 weeks, but eventually, Houston agreed. Texas would remain part of the United States, in exchange for greater autonomy and federal investment in Reconstruction. Similar deals were struck with other states considering secession. America stayed united. Barely. But it was enough. Chapter 8: The Next Generation. 2053 years after liberation, 3 years after liberation, America was starting to resemble a nation again. Cities were rebuilding. The economy was growing. Democratic governance was being restored. It wasn't pre-war America, that was gone forever, but it was something new, something that honored the past while building toward the future. Marcus was 57 now, officially retired from military service, though he remained active as an advisor and public figure. He'd refused offers to run for political office, insisting he was a soldier, not a politician. You could be president, Sarah told him once. She was governor of Colorado now, one of the most powerful politicians in the restored nation. People would vote for you in a heartbeat. That's why I can't run, Marcus replied. I'm a symbol. The moment I become a politician, I stop being a symbol. Better to stay above the fray. But retirement didn't mean inactivity. Marcus traveled constantly, visiting veterans, speaking at memorials, working with Reconstruction efforts. He'd become, without quite meaning to, the face of American resurgence, the living embodiment of the idea that America could survive anything. In June 2050, he received an invitation he couldn't refuse, to speak at the dedication of the National Liberation Monument in New Denver, built on the ruins of the old city. The monument was massive, a sculpture of ordinary Americans raising the flag, their faces showing determination and diversity. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all of them Americans, all of them free. It was meant to symbolize the unity that had won the liberation, the idea that America was stronger together. Marcus stood before the monument, looking up at the bronze faces. They reminded him of his soldiers, Elena, Tommy, Washington, all the men and women who'd fought beside him over the years. The dead and the living, all of them captured in metal, immortalized. 50,000 Americans died in the Liberation War, Marcus said in his dedication speech. That's on top of the 61 million who died in the occupation. 61 million, 50,000 lives, given so that America could be free. This monument isn't just about military victory. It's about the idea that some things are worth fighting for. That freedom isn't free, that liberty requires sacrifice, that America is worth saving. I look at this monument and I see everyone who made it possible. The soldiers who fought. The civilians who supported them. The families who endured. The children who grew up in occupation and refused to accept it as normal. We're here today because millions of Americans said no to occupation, no to tyranny, no to the idea that might makes right. And their collective refusal changed history. The crowd, 50,000 people gathered for the dedication, stood silent, listening. Marcus saw faces in the crowd, veterans, refugees, families of the fallen. He saw Elena Vasquez, now a major, standing at attention. Saw Master Sergeant Washington in his wheelchair, proud and weathered. Saw Dr. Parker, the scientist who'd created Sentinel, looking thoughtful. The war is over, Marcus continued. But the work isn't. We've won our freedom. Now we have to prove we deserve it. We have to build a nation that honors the sacrifices, that treats everyone fairly, that lives up to the ideals we fought for. That's the real test. Not winning the war, wars can be won with courage and weapons. Building lasting peace requires wisdom, patience, and the willingness to do the hard, unglamorous work of governance. So remember this moment. Remember what we fought for. And when times get hard, when politics gets messy, when rebuilding seems impossible, when you wonder if it was all worth it, remember that 61 million, 50,000 Americans thought it was worth it. They gave everything. We owe them a future worthy of their sacrifice. He stepped back from the podium. The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus barely heard it. He was thinking about Private Rodriguez, dead at Kansas City. About the 800 soldiers who died taking Fort Greely. About millions of nameless Americans who died during the occupation. They'd won. But God, what a price. Part 2, International Relations. As America rebuilt, it had to navigate a changed world. Russia was in retreat, weakened by the failed occupation, facing internal unrest. China had grown stronger, dominated Asia, and viewed America's resurgence with concern. Europe was recovering, grateful for American sacrifice but nervous about American power. President Williams, re-elected in 2048 in the first fully legitimate election since before the occupation, had to rebuild America's diplomatic relationships from scratch. She appointed Marcus as special envoy for international relations, giving him the task of explaining to the world what America had become. Why me? Marcus had asked when offered the position. Because you're trusted, Williams replied. Foreign leaders know you fought honorably, treated prisoners fairly, stopped your troops from committing atrocities. They'll listen to you in a way they won't listen to politicians. So Marcus became a diplomat, traveling to Europe, Asia, South America. He met with presidents and prime ministers, explaining that America wasn't seeking empire, wasn't planning revenge, just wanted to rebuild and coexist. The meeting with Russian President V. Alkov, son of the foreign minister who negotiated the withdrawal, was particularly tense. Commander West, V. Alkov said stiffly. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to be here, Marcus admitted. They were in Geneva, neutral ground, negotiating trade agreements. But peace requires talking to people you fought. So here we are. My father spoke highly of you. Said you were honorable, even when you had every reason not to be. I tried to be. Didn't always succeed. None of us did. V. Alkov looked tired, burdened by the weight of his father's failures and his own responsibility to fix them. Russia needs to move past the occupation. We need trade, diplomacy, normal relations. But there's anger on both sides. How do we get past that? Time, Marcus said. Time and the willingness to judge nations by their present actions, not their past crimes. Russia today isn't the Russia that occupied America. America today isn't the America that surrendered. We're both different now. Question is whether we can work together, or whether we're going to keep fighting forever. And what do you think? I think fighting forever is exhausting. I think both our countries have paid enough in blood. I think there's room for coexistence, even if we'll never be friends. V. Alkov nodded slowly. Then let us coexist. Let us trade, negotiate, find ways to work together. Not because we like each other, but because the alternative is more war, and no one benefits from that. The trade agreement was signed 3 months later. It wasn't friendship, wasn't alliance, just the recognition that peace served everyone's interests better than conflict. It was a start. Part 3: Training the Future. By 2055, America had reclaimed its place as a major world power. The economy was booming, fueled by Reconstruction and freed from Russian exploitation. The military was rebuilt, not to conquer but to ensure no one would ever occupy American territory again. Democracy was functioning, with regular elections and peaceful transitions of power. Elena Vasquez, now 30, was a lieutenant colonel, commanding a battalion training the next generation of American soldiers. She stood on a training field at Fort Bragg, watching young recruits run drills, and thought about how far they'd come. These kids had been born during the occupation, had grown up in a conquered America, had no memory of pre-war prosperity. But they'd also grown up with stories of liberation, with the knowledge that Americans had fought back and won. They were determined to ensure it never happened again. Lieutenant Colonel, one of the recruits, approached nervously. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Private." "Did you really fight at Colorado Springs? At Kansas City? Were you there when we took Fort Greely?" Elena smiled. She was a legend to these kids, one of the original liberation fighters. "Yes, I was there. I was 19 at Colorado Springs. 20 at Fort Greely. Younger than you are now. What was it like?" "Terrifying. Chaotic. We were outnumbered, outgunned, fighting an enemy that had occupied America for 20 years. We should have lost." She paused. "But we didn't. We won because we refused to accept defeat. Because we believed in something worth fighting for." "The flag?" "The flag, yes. But more than that, the idea behind the flag. That all people are created equal. That liberty is worth any price. That America is more than just a place, it's a promise." The recruit nodded seriously, trying to internalize the lesson. Elena hoped he'd never have to fight the way she had, never have to kill or watch friends die. But if he did, she hoped he'd remember why it mattered. Chapter 9: Legacy. 2065. 18 years after liberation, Marcus was 67, officially retired, living quietly in Colorado. He'd written a memoir about the liberation, had given countless interviews, had advised on military policy. But mostly, he just wanted to be left alone to live out his final years in peace. Sarah visited him regularly. She was in her 60s now, still active in politics, still working to build the America they'd fought for. "You should come to Denver," she said during one visit. "They're dedicating a statue of you in the Capitol. You're expected to give a speech." "Another statue? How many statues does one person need? It's not about you. It's about what you represent. You're a symbol of American resistance, American victory. People need symbols. I'm just a soldier who did his job. You're more than that, and you know it. You're a hero to millions of people. The least you can do is show up and let them say thank you." So Marcus went to Denver, attended the dedication, gave another speech about sacrifice and duty. He was getting tired of speeches, tired of ceremonies, tired of being a symbol. He just wanted to be Marcus West, regular person, not Commander West, American hero. But he understood the need. Understood that symbols mattered, that people needed something to believe in. If being a symbol helped America stay united, helped people remember what they'd fought for, then he'd keep being a symbol. It was the least he could do for the dead. Part 2: The Interview. In 2067, 20 years after liberation, a young journalist named Michael Torres came to interview Marcus for a documentary about the occupation and liberation. "Commander West," Torres began, "20 years ago, you led the liberation of America. Looking back, what do you think about what we've accomplished?" Marcus thought about it carefully. "We've built something good. Not perfect, nothing's perfect. But good. We've restored democracy, rebuilt the economy, treated people fairly regardless of race or background. We've proven that America's ideals can survive anything, even nuclear war and occupation. Do you have any regrets?" "Thousands. Every soldier who died under my command. Every civilian caught in crossfire. Every hard choice that cost lives. Command means living with those regrets." "But would you do it again?" "In a heartbeat. Because the alternative was accepting tyranny, and Americans don't do that. We fought because we had to, because freedom is worth any price. And we won because we refused to give up. What's your message to future generations? Marcus looked directly at the camera. Don't take freedom for granted. It's fragile. It requires constant vigilance, constant work, constant sacrifice. Every generation has to earn it again, has to prove they deserve it. We fought for you. Now you have to fight for your children. Not with weapons, hopefully, you'll never need weapons. But with votes, with participation, with the willingness to do the hard work of citizenship. That's a lot of responsibility. It is. But that's what freedom means. Responsibility. The right to choose comes with the duty to choose wisely. We've given you that chance. What you do with it is up to you. Chapter 10, 50 years 2075. 50 years after the nuclear strikes, the year is 2075. Marcus West, now 82 years old and decorated with every medal America could award, stood at the dedication of the expanded National Liberation Monument in New Denver. The monument had grown over the years, adding new sections honoring different aspects of the liberation. Around him stood the survivors, Sarah, now 80, still sharp despite her age. Tommy Nakamura, Colonel, retired, living in Seattle. Elena Vasquez, Lieutenant General, one of the highest-ranking officers in the American military. Washington had passed away 5 years earlier, at 85, still teaching tactics to young officers from his wheelchair until his final day. Marcus looked at the monument, bronze figures raising the flag, their faces showing determination and diversity. The same monument from 25 years ago, but larger now, more comprehensive, showing more of the story. The president, a young black woman named Jasmine Williams, born 8 years after liberation, gave the dedication speech. We gather today to remember what was lost and celebrate what was saved. 50 years ago, America fell. 5 missiles destroyed 5 cities, killed 60 million people. 20 years after that, America rose, fighting back from occupation, reclaiming freedom. The generation that saved us taught us something invaluable, that strength isn't just military power or economic dominance. Real strength is the courage to hold onto your values when everything else is stripped away. Real strength is choosing justice over vengeance, unity over division, hope over despair. We stand here today, black and white, Hispanic and Asian, native-born and immigrant, all of us Americans, all of us free, because a group of patriots refused to accept defeat. They fought not just for territory, but for an idea, the idea that all people are created equal, that liberty is worth any price, that America is more than a place on a map. That idea survived nuclear fire. It can survive anything. The crowd, 100,000 people gathered for the dedication, stood in respectful silence. Behind Marcus, a group of school children, the great-grandchildren of the war generation, children who'd never known occupation, recited the Pledge of Allegiance. Their voices rang clear and certain, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The American flag, pristine and proud, flew over the monument. And all across the nation, in cities rebuilt and communities restored, Americans of every color and creed stopped what they were doing. They placed their hands over their hearts. They looked up at the flag. And they remembered. Marcus felt tears on his withered cheeks. 82 years old, body failing, mind still sharp. He'd lived to see America restored, had watched it rise from ashes stronger than before. He'd done his part, paid his dues, earned his rest. Not bad, Sarah said beside him, her voice soft. Not bad at all. No, Marcus agreed, looking out at the crowd, at the children who'd inherited the freedom he'd fought for. Not bad at all. The monument stood as testament to what was possible when people refused to surrender their values, their identity, their hope. It stood as proof that America wasn't just a place or a government, but an idea, and ideas, once truly embraced, could survive anything. Even nuclear fire. Elena approached, her uniform crisp despite her 50 years, saluted Marcus with parade ground precision. Sir, the formation is ready. Formation? They fought not just for territory, but for an idea, the idea that all people are created equal, that liberty is worth any price, that America is more than a place on a map. That idea survived nuclear fire. It can survive anything. The crowd, 100,000 people gathered for the dedication, stood in respectful silence. Behind Marcus, a group of school children, the great-grandchildren of the war generation, children who'd never known occupation, recited the Pledge of Allegiance. Their voices rang clear and certain, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The American flag, pristine and proud, flew over the monument. And all across the nation, in cities rebuilt and communities restored, Americans of every color and creed stopped what they were doing. They placed their hands over their hearts. They looked up at the flag. And they remembered. Marcus felt tears on his withered cheeks. 82 years old, body failing, mind still sharp. He'd lived to see America restored, had watched it rise from ashes stronger than before. He'd done his part, paid his dues, earned his rest. Not bad, Sarah said beside him, her voice soft. Not bad at all. No, Marcus agreed, looking out at the crowd, at the children who'd inherited the freedom he'd fought for. Not bad at all. The monument stood as testament to what was possible when people refused to surrender their values, their identity, their hope. It stood as proof that America wasn't just a place or a government, but an idea, and ideas, once truly embraced, could survive anything. Even nuclear fire. Elena approached, her uniform crisp despite her 50 years, saluted Marcus with parade ground precision. Sir. The formation is ready. Formation? Military honors. For you and the other liberation veterans. President's orders. Marcus wanted to protest, he wasn't dead yet, didn't need honors. But he saw the faces of the young soldiers in formation, saw how much it meant to them to honor the generation that had saved America. All right, he said. Let's give them their ceremony. The military formation marched past, flags flying, drums beating, young soldiers saluting old warriors. Marcus stood at attention despite his age, despite his weariness, returning their salutes. This was the future. These young soldiers, these children, these Americans who'd been given a chance because someone had refused to let America die. That was legacy. That was victory. As the sun set over New Denver, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Marcus West stood before the National Liberation Monument and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They'd won. Not just the war, but the peace. Not just survival, but resurgence. America lived. And it was beautiful. Epilogue: The promise kept. 2085. 10 years later, Marcus West passed away in his sleep in 2085, at the age of 92. His funeral was attended by 50,000 people, including 3 presidents, countless military leaders, and ordinary Americans who wanted to say goodbye to the man who'd led their liberation. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, in a section reserved for heroes of the liberation. His grave was simple, a white headstone, his name, his rank, his service dates. No grand statements, no poetic inscriptions. Just the facts, the way Marcus would have wanted it. Marcus West, Commander, U.S. Armed Forces 2033 to 2085. He never stopped fighting. Sarah Rodriguez died 2 years later, at 87, still working on reconstruction projects until her final week. Tommy Nakamura lived to 95, teaching military history at West Point. Elena Vasquez became the first woman to serve as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, retiring at 65 after 40 years of service. The America they built continued to grow, continued to evolve, continued to prove that the idea of America was stronger than any weapon, any occupation, any disaster. In schools across the nation, children learned about the occupation and liberation. Learned about ordinary Americans who became heroes, who refused to accept tyranny, who fought for 20 years to reclaim their freedom. They learned that America doesn't stay down. Never has. Never will. And when those children grew up and faced their own challenges, they remembered the lessons, that freedom requires sacrifice, that unity is strength, that some things are worth fighting for. They remembered because their parents remembered, because their grandparents remembered, because the story was told and retold, passed down through generations. The story of how America fell. And how America rose. In the year 2125, on the 100-year anniversary of the nuclear strikes, the President of the United States, a man whose great-grandparents had fought in the liberation, stood before the National Liberation Monument and spoke to a crowd of millions. "We gather to remember," he said. "To remember what we lost, what we endured, what we overcame. 100 years ago, America was destroyed by nuclear fire. 80 years ago, America was occupied by a foreign power. 60 years ago, America fought back and won. That story, of destruction and occupation and liberation, defines who we are. It reminds us that America is not a place or a government or a flag. America is an idea. The idea that all people are created equal. That liberty is worth any price. That freedom, once claimed, can never truly be taken away. We stand here today, free and strong and united, because people like Marcus West and Sarah Rodriguez and Elena Vasquez refused to give up. Refused to accept defeat. refused to believe that tyranny was inevitable. Their refusal changed history. Their sacrifice gave us this moment. Their legacy lives in every American who values freedom over security, who chooses courage over comfort, who believes that some things are worth fighting for. We are their legacy. We are their promise kept. We are America, risen from ashes, stronger than before, eternal as the idea that created us. And we will never fall again. The crowd erupted in cheers. Across the nation, millions of Americans, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, immigrants and native-born, all of them stood together, looked at the flag flying overhead, and felt the weight of history and the promise of the future. America had fallen once. But America had risen. And America, born from that fire and blood and sacrifice, would endure. Forever. The END in memory of all who fight for freedom, in every generation, in every nation. May their sacrifice never be forgotten. May their legacy inspire us always. May America live forever.